Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Stratosphere Studio. I'm Bill Whittle. It is a Monday night. It's the 2nd of February. Hope everybody's doing well. Um, I got a haircut and I decided to stop bleaching my eyebrows white. Uh, it's just a strange thing, you lose so much expressiveness, and as always, they just seem to go too far. But it'll eventually fade. Just about then, it'll be time to do them again, I guess. But you know, these are things I do for you, not for me, for my audience. I care so much. I hope everybody's doing really well here. Uh, it's Groundhog Day, is it? Good Lord. Oh, that was yesterday. Okay. Well, hi everybody. It's good to see everybody. Um, we have been, as usual, busy working on our uh, colony story here, and doing more writing on it, and wrapping up finally the the basics. So I've been kind of behind on delivering this Cast 27 thing. It's going to take a while. It's going to take probably 2-3 weeks to start getting things that I could actually consider finished footage. But as I said, um, you pay for, if you spend a day on the basics here, you don't have to spend a week or 10 days later on the basics, when when everything just mistakes and makes cascades and all the rest of that stuff. Um, so uh, yeah, so I just got a couple little things, and again, they're not, just come out and say it, they're not terribly interesting from a storytelling point of view, but they're just really, really solid from a foundational tech point of view. Did I ever show? I honestly don't remember doing this. Did I ever show like a bunch of different angles of the rover? I might have shown one or two. I did. Uh, I did a rover test, um, and again, a bunch of rover tests. In fact, it's actually almost boring. So we'll just start off about that, and one of the little tests, and we'll jump into the questions and we'll get that done. Let me see here. What's this? Our friend Don Vickery. Good to see you, Don. Bill, would you put behind your paywall a few-page doc that outlines your found procedure for generating the AI clips you've shown? I will be more than happy to put that out in front. I'm going to be starting a Colonies YouTube channel. I want to talk to a friend of mine to do the. He's a graphic designer. I want to talk to him about doing the art design for the logo. Interestingly enough, I did start thinking about, of all things, about Colonies merchandise, and I thought that'd be a fun way to get a little bit of buzz going. So I came up with some T-shirt ideas. Some of these things are more hit than miss, but um, just some fun things just to kind of get out of there. And one or two of these are not Colonies things. The one or two of these will probably be branded behind BillWhittle.com. For example, I want to have a T-shirt. This will be a Bill Whittle T-shirt, and the T-shirt says, "Eliminate redundancy. Just get rid of it." And the other T-shirt I want to have for BillWhittle.com is, at least right off, is, "I'd rather listen to an engineer sing a show tune than drive over a bridge designed by an actor." But as far as the Colonies go, um, I'm just trying to get that sort of vibe, trying to nail down the vibe, and so some of them just a little bit, different. I have a T-shirt that I like that says, "Incompetence kills without malice." I think that's kind of a cool line. I want to do one with just a neutral face emoji that says "Have a nominal day." I want to do one that has like the triangle of a guy slipping and falling, and it says "Beware unknown unknowns." I'm going to make up my own little warning thing that says warning fusion core containment field. One's going to be like real uh, minimalist. It's just going to be a small lowercase c, and below that it's going to say remove before flight. And then I have two that are a little bit weird. One of them is they're both like retro 50s postcards or advertisements. That great period uh, where all the men had pipes, and the women were like real trim with the dresses, and they had a lot of car commercials at that time, right around the just as you're getting out of the 50s and into the early 60s, when those fins were leaving things. And one of them would be like a flying car. One of them would be one of them would be like a housewife, and she's trying to clean away like I don't know, like some kind of matrix. And it says space-time drag, try qubits. And then finally, I just want to do one of a guy walking out to his brand new car, and it's a candy apple red, super slick looking, just a futuristic flying car, and the wife is there adoringly, and it's like a car ad, and it says in the font, it says it's got a turbo encabulator. And then below that, in like four little bullet points, it'll say made of 100% prefamulated amylite, 4 hydrocoptic Marsal veins, eliminates side bumbling. So just little, inside jokes to the whole kind of engineering thing, and just sort of start to set out this sense that that unlike Starfleet Academy, for people who don't know how to write science fiction or fiction, it would be just a lot of engineering kind of inside jokes that just sort of hit that competence vibe. And then just across the back, just in very small letters across the back, would just say the colonies on it. So, Maurice Dark says side fumbling is no joke. It's not. It causes a lot of problems. That's why you need the Marsal veins. So it's sci-fi for people who like sci-fi. Yeah, and that's kind of the whole point of like the T-shirts would be this would just be a way for you to do something that that nobody gets except for a real small group of people. So, I don't know. I think that'd be fun. So I just got two quick little tech demo things. One of them's not so quick to show you, and then we will get on our merry way here. The first one, I will just play without comment. Everybody's said many times when I do some of these practice things, when we did it with Major Mace Mattingly at the first time, and then a lot of things where I had to do the acting, motion capture of the performance. Everybody says, we can just tell it's you, and so I thought, well, you might as well just go with that. So I'm going to play you. First of all, I'm going to play you. It's one clip, broken into 3 segments, and I don't. It's not to be judged by what's being said. It's just to look at how well did the character face geometry hold up. Okay, that's really what it comes down to. In other words, you're going to recognize who's doing the driving on the clip, but the question is, how well, technically speaking, just technically, how well does the AI hold up? Not in terms of content, just in terms of the believability of the image and the quality of the image. Okay, so I think we got those both teed up here and ready to go. So I'll just I think I'll just play them both, and then we'll come back and chat about them real quick. Okay, ready? Here we go. You know, I've been very, very critical of the idea of this female warrior girl boss, 110-pound, 5'2" woman who's got a sword and she's hacking apart these, 17 knights who are 280 pounds. I'm just so over it as a trope. It's just completely awful. It doesn't mean I'm against female heroes. I think Sarah Connor was a great character. I think Ellen Ripley was a great character.
I've been very, very critical of the idea of this female warrior girl boss, 110-pound, 5'2" woman who's got a sword and she's hacking apart these, 17 knights who are 280. But I'm just so over it as a trope. It's just completely awful. It doesn't mean I'm against female heroes. I think Sarah Connor was a great character. I think Ellen Ripley was a great character.
I've been very, very critical of the idea of this female warrior girl boss, 110-pound, 5'2" woman who's got a sword and she's hacking apart these, 17 knights who are 280. But I'm just so over it as a trope. It's just completely awful. It doesn't mean I'm against female heroes. I think Sarah Connor was a great character. I think Ellen Ripley was a great character.
Remarkable acting performance there, but I just literally grabbed a piece of a right angle and just used that without any special performance or anything like that. And I thought the lip sync was great, and I think especially what was great was the capture of all the micro expressions, all of the little looks and the sides, and that's basically how the project works. Either I or an actor sit and read into a phone, and then or even into the webcam, and then what comes out is really creepy because the first version of that has Jake and Will with my voice. Then my voice goes into a voice changer and then spit out a version with Jake's voice, spit out a version with Will's voice, and it looks good. But I think the quality of the faces are fantastic. Let's see. Battle Smurf says, "What app are you using?" So I made the faces in Midjourney, and then I took them into Nano Banana, and I did a bunch of different perspectives on them, and then I did the animation in Runway Act 2. So you just upload a still of the character, then you upload the driving video, which I showed you. The driving video was the first clip, and it just takes a look at every single frame of the video and distorts the face of the still on a frame by frame basis. And you don't have to do motion capture suits, and you don't have to do all the little dots on your face. You don't have to do any of this stuff. And I think the results are really good. And furthermore, those were done in photo studio lighting. So Trinity Water says not enough micro movement around the eyes. Well, I beg to differ. I'll run it again. I've been very, very critical of the idea of this female warrior girl boss, 110-pound, 5'2" woman who's got a sword and she's hacking apart these, 17 knights who are 280 pounds. I'm just so over it as a trope. It's just completely awful. It doesn't mean I'm against female heroes. I think Sarah Connor was a great character. I think Ellen Ripley was a great character.
I've been very, very critical of the idea of this female warrior girl boss, 110-pound, 5'2" woman who's got a sword and she's hacking apart these, 17 knights who are 280. But I'm just so over it as a trope. It's just completely awful. It doesn't mean I'm against female heroes. I think Sarah Connor was a great character. I think Ellen Ripley was a great character.
I've been very, very critical of the idea of this female warrior girl boss, 110-pound, 5'2" woman who's got a sword and she's hacking apart these, 17 knights who are 280. But I'm just so over it as a trope. It's just completely awful. It doesn't mean I'm against female heroes. I think Sarah Connor was a great character. I think Ellen Ripley was a great character.
No, it's all there. Every frame of it's there. It's absolutely. It's captured every micro expression. It's captured the wrinkles, all of it. Too smart for a child? Yes, that's why I said we're not going to judge it by the content. We're going to judge it by whether or not it looks realistic. So I'm not going to let them mock me. I'm just going to give them a smack in the nose. It's perfect. When we get real actors in here to sit for this, it's actually kind of amazing. So John O'Hurley, I miss him. He was hilarious. What were those commercials he was in? He was in like insurance commercials. It'd be about 1999 where he played Zeus, I think. Yeah, it was great. So anyway, I thought if it looks good in a photo studio, it looks really good on any other kind of lighting, any kind of thing with shadows or anything like that. Looks great. The second thing is about a 2 or 3 minute rover test. The rover is really hard. I put a fair amount of work into this already, and I've got more to do on this. I have the script for this thing has been finished for weeks now. So the thing to look on these rover tests are, remember that that AI doesn't know what the back of something looks like. So in order to get consistent geometry in a series of different angles, you really have to really be careful about setting up the reference angles and how you do the prompts and so on. And now the rover, this is the house that they live in. This is the rover that they discover on the planet. I'm really happy with the physics are phenomenal. You watch just the simplest little things like putting in tracks in CGI so that a wheel leaves tracks on the ground is a bear. And all of the little particle effects you would have to do for ice and water. Keep an eye on the ground and the physics of it are perfect. The part that is still lacking on the ones I'm about to show you are the characters inside the cabin. And part of that is a problem because frickin' Google Veo will not let me upload any images of minors. So if I've got Will in the cabin, even if he's in a parka, it won't allow you to upload him. It just won't. And it makes me insane. I fully understand the concerns about things like child pornography and all the rest of it. I completely get that, but it's generating the image, and there are other animation drivers that will work. You saw him doing the talking, so that worked. But the physics on Veo 3, which I'm about to show you, are fantastic, and so this is actually about 3 minutes, and you're not going to see anything particularly exciting, except for that over the course of it's about 245, 250, and just look at two things that I did all these tests on. One of them, how well does the geometry of the rover hold up? Do the wheels start to morph? If you see a piece of geometry and it disappears and it comes back, does it come back in the right place? The thing I'm not happy about yet is the quality of of Will and Jake inside the cabin. Yes, a copy aficionado, but the persistence, the geometric persistence. I think this is rock solid considering it doesn't know what this rover is in 3D space. And the second thing I'll say about this is this was all taken off of a still image of the rover that I'm not going to redo it completely, but I am going to go back in, get close-up details, and I'm going to be putting a lot of details on the rover that are not there yet, and I'll be doing that the next couple days. For instance, there's going to be decals. It's going to have Jake's company on the side. There's going to be little, rescue decals, danger decals, lots of the little tiny little markings that really give it scale. And I've always found that little tiny blocks of writing really help, just give it scale. But as a general rule, I think the geometry on this just really, really holds together very, very well. So here's about just about 2.5 minutes of the rover from different angles. I would say pay special attention to the interaction of the wheels and the ground, because it's damn near faultless. When it goes into mud, and it's generating the landscape as it goes. So when it hits mud and then slush, and then there's sometimes it goes over like a sheet of ice, and there's times when it goes up a hill into snow. It looks absolutely perfect to me. So after we do this, we'll jump into the questions here. So this is a rover test for just overall believability, and I can certainly light it better too. I can light it more dramatically than this. I lit it fairly cleanly because I really, really, really looking at those geometric details. But the question is, if you saw this on TV, would you buy it? There'd, needless to say, be a lot more action and dialogue to break it up. But these are just a bunch of exteriors of the rover. So here we go. Now, it doesn't know what the back looks like yet, but even then it did a pretty good job of it. Look at the splashes under the ice, and the mush and the slush trails it leaves. It's just perfect. And the way the wheels go up, and then the snow. I can't get over it. This one where it turns up the hill and slows down and digs into the snow. Except it's not particle effects independent thinker. It's the computer is doing all of this based on watching millions of different videos of real tires going through real slush, and the way the suspension works on the lurch. It's starting to pick up speed now. There's one or two clips where the thing's really hauling up. But I mean, the physics are just phenomenal, and the lighting. And the geometry is just really solid. Stops and backs up, but now you start to see the thing moving at speed, and it looks to me like it's really hauling butt over that terrain. Shot with the sun behind it here. It's really kind of cool. I mean, Jake and Will in the front are not terrible, but I can improve them. But the geometry is just phenomenal. That's pretty impressive. So, obviously, this is a Hero vehicle, and this is going to be where they live, so it's got to get it right. So the next step is for me to get into 3D Studio, get super big close-ups of these things. Thank you. And put some just a little detail on there. I can do things like, for example, on the hydraulic shocks, I can tell it that the top part of the shock is chrome. I can put little bit of color accents on there. Also, there's a scene when in probably episode 2, I think, where we've got the situation where they land on the, they leave, and Claire, who we haven't really seen any details on yet, is just so heartbroken and angry and checked out that Dad tells the family that she gets to name this place, and she's not in the best possible space, and he says, "You name it whatever you want to," and then Lisa says, "But remember, it's our home, and it's going to be Dad's office." So she's very close to Will, and she gets a chance to be nice with Will so that she doesn't come off like this horrible brat the whole time. Anyway, they're at this they're at this kind of maintenance area at Point Johnson, where they land at this landing area, and she thinks of a name, and then she's just got a little wrist device, and she comes up with a little just basically talks to the AI and comes up with an image, and then she walks over to a guy and says, "Hey, sir, could I use your paint gun? Can you tell me what you charge for that?" This guy's got like this kind of somewhat electronic looking thing, and the guy says, "Hey, how long you need it for?" "Oh, 10 minutes. "Yeah, just go ahead, just take it, don't worry about it." So she takes her design and swipes it onto the paint gun, and then there's like a little laser box showing the 4 corners of how big this thing's going to be, and she keeps stepping back, so it gets to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And Will is saying, like, "I don't know, man. I don't know if you really want to do this," but she's in a mood. So so she holds this thing and gets it steady on the back of the thing, and then she just pulls this trigger. And I don't know if you've seen this. I think Mythbusters might have done this something. And this gun just shoots out this cloud of micropellets, just instantly, just pop like that. And it's a cartoon of a like a blue like a freezing blue like elf, seen from behind with his, butt sticking out, and then and she decides to name the rover the Ass Goblin. I don't know why it just came to me, and then Lisa sees that and gets extremely upset, and Jake sees it and just laughs, thinks it's hilarious. Like the Calvin Piss decal, exactly. And so that's the name of it, the Ass Goblin. And that's like the first moment where you start to see a little bit of the thaw between Jake and Claire, because Claire does this because she's just so bloody angry, and to see Dad laughing at it, just a nice kind of a pressure release. The Ass Goblin, that's funny. Just the Ass Goblin. And I don't know, I just thought, what would she name it? And that's the first thing that came into my head. So anyway, there's that. So you put those decals on there, and that really personalizes the thing a lot. And there we go. Airtucky says, "So we're going away from the strictly family-friendly feel." Yeah, I've got to make a decision about this. I know for one certain fact that I'm not going to be in F-bomb land. That's for certain. And I noticed that when The Expanse went from, where did it start? I forget what channel it was on, when they finally picked it up for the second two, it's a series, a TV series, Lady Janie. But when they finally moved it to, was it Netflix who bought it or whatever? Was it originally on Sci-Fi? I don't remember. It was on Sci-Fi or whatever. Then it moved. Then somebody else bought it, and I think it was their last 2 or 3 seasons, whatever. But all of a sudden, the language like went to like every third word was was an F-bomb, and I'm definitely not going there. But at the same time, I'm editing the Mike Rowe shows, and I've been a guest on 17 of them. They got sold to Angel, and Angel, I have to cut all of the. I have a line where I said those rotten commie bastards. Bastards had to go. I took the damn thing. Damn had to go. And there's no way I'm going there. Infidel 42 says 3 seasons on Sci-Fi, 3 on Amazon. First 3 were by far the best. Yeah, so I'm not going there. I think what I'll probably, I don't know. I was sitting at, no, Angel didn't let Damn go through, and Angel has a like I don't know how many, whether it's 80 people or 800 people or 8,000. I don't remember. But Angel Studios has like a review board, and they all get to look at it, and they all give it a rating. And if it doesn't get an 80 or something, then it just doesn't get on the air. But it needs to, it needs to have, it needs. I keep coming back, and we've had this conversation many, many times before. But George Carlin, and I think he said this on network TV, or it was either that or it was one of his earlier specials. But he famously came up with the 7 words you can't say on TV, and one of them was piss, and he said, you can't have a scene where you've got a bunch of Hell's Angels. And one of the guys pulls over and they say, Snake, what's the matter? And he says, I have to tinkle now. It just doesn't work. So yeah, I think it's just going to be only when called for and never by, or virtually never by the protagonist. It's one way to isolate yourself away from the the villains and stuff. I don't know if I ever. I've got. I spent a lot of time on this family, and I've got the dynamics of this whole thing down just very, very well now. And I don't know if I talked about this. I might have specifically avoided it. That's the last thing I'll say. I guess, and we'll get to the questions. So, my number one. My number one objective is to tell just great science fiction stories that that people want to watch. But in terms of it's certainly not the message, but it is sort of the tone. So Star Trek was was about an optimistic future, and Roddenberry made a lot of effort to show the elimination of prejudice, and that you don't want to say if that was exactly the mission of Star Trek, but it was certainly one of the things about Star Trek that was so inspirational about it. And so one of the things I'm really, really trying to do is to show young people, specifically Gen Z, but not just Gen Z. I'm trying to show them what it's like to have a good dad, strong dad, a strong family, a strong wife who's not a bitch, who's not, a girl boss. Who, Jake wouldn't put up with that crap, and neither would Lisa. I'm trying to get all of these things in, and so you have a situation where, for me, Jake's overriding his entire identity is is built into being a protector. He is doing what men do. He is providing for and protecting his family, and he's more than willing to put himself in between any danger and his family. And he takes it very seriously, and that's great. But it's also boring. And so what makes the drama interesting is, in the case of Jake, where if you're going to give Jake faults, and he has to have faults and flaws, those faults and flaws have to be coming from the right place. It's an overabundance. He goes too far. In Cast 27, they're in the rover, and they're just driving along before they make this discovery, and Will says, "Dad, is there any chance we can warm it up? It's really cold in here." And Jake says, "No, I'm sorry, son, no. We live on a cold planet, and it's going to get a lot colder, and we have to acclimate to it, and the sooner we do it, the better, because it's going to get a lot colder." And I was just thinking about this with Vikings, and I mean, you see all these Vikings walking around, and they just acclimated to the cold. So he's willing to put his family through, discomfort in order to protect them. So where does that go too far? Well, a little bit later in the series, still well in the first half of the first season, I had him. He wouldn't do these back to back because it looks ridiculous. But sprinkled out through the first 5, 6, 7 episodes, we find out that he lowers the air pressure inside the rover that they live in, and he does it progressively because he's trying to build tolerance for the low air. The planet has lower atmospheric pressure than Earth and a slightly lower oxygen percentage than Earth. So they agreed before they left that they didn't want to live on a vacuum planet where you open the door and just automatically dead. But you probably got 2 minutes before you lose consciousness. And when you get to the people that climb Everest, or people who live in the Andes, or even in Colorado for that matter, what happens is if you're going to climb Everest, as I'm sure you know, you can't just go up there and climb Everest. You have to spend 4, 6 weeks, whatever, just at base camp, which is at 14, 15,000 feet something. Because when your body is subjected to low pressure, you make more platelets, more red blood vessels, because you're not getting as much oxygen, and so your body compensates by making more of the cells that carry oxygen. And so he's slowly lowering the pressure inside the rover. He's not going to take it all the way because you just get hypothermia. But what he's trying to do is he's trying to build up his family's physical resistance to low pressure. And yeah, hemoglobin, exactly, Dave. And so that's kind of a harsh thing to do. One of the things he's going to do is when it gets like really cold, like 40 below, 40 or 50 below, and they're still in the rover, he's just going to insist that they, one by one, that they stand there by the airlock, and he's going to go first, and he's just simply, at nighttime, with all the lights on, around the rover, he's just going to go out, and he's going to walk around the rover once, and then he's going to do it twice. He's got shoes on, but they're just the clothes that they would normally wear, because he wants them to know how deadly this cold is. And so he's going to have every one of them go around the thing once, and it's like, can you want to lighten up, dude? And he's like, I can't lighten up. We can't lighten up. This place, I've got a line in Cast 27 I wrote already. Said, what did we, what did I tell you before we moved here, Will? He said, if we're careful, it's dangerous, and if we're not, it's deadly. So they just have to walk around it once in the cold, and they do that. Then there's going to be a time when he's going to have, and he's not going to know. He's just going to basically tell the rover's computer, at some point in the next 3 days, between the hours of midnight and 4 a.m., you're going to simulate a pressure leak. And they're all going to be sleeping, and all of a sudden it's just going to be, air pressure, and, and there are going to be alarms going off, and the lights aren't going to come on, and they're going to say we can't see anything, and they got to find their little emergency respirators, because he wants those guys to be able to do this literally in their sleep. At what point does this become cruel? So here's the one where he crosses the line, and this is in the first episode. So there are two things that basically make Jake and Lisa decide to leave. The political thing is, this is when the transition comes, when the United States becomes NACAD, North American Central Administrative District, and I'm going to get ChatGPT to write a commercial that's going to be playing everywhere. And it's going to be like a, real Wilford Brimley kind of guy. And he's going to say things like, some people say that that this is the end of America. You can't ever kill America. This country's too tough to ever be killed. Now all that's happening to America is it's just getting to be a little better than it used to be before. And then it lists all of these communist things in the most patriotic way possible. We don't know. Colonies will all be treated this way, and it's going to be much more efficient, and we're going to get all this benefits and all of this other stuff. So it's just going to be. It's not even America anymore. But the one thing that really forces Jake off is that Claire, his 16-year-old daughter, who was really good girl growing up, has just reached that rebellious phase, and he's terrified. So they live on the outskirts of Los Angeles, and the opening pilot episode, family beats are, first time we see Jake, he's coming into a kind of a, I don't want to put it on the nose for being like a cyber city. It's more of an arcology. They live inside this self-contained environment because most of LA has just been deserted, and they've built these self-contained communities, and he lives in the Culver City arcology or whatever. And he goes into a relatively low-class kind of a convenience type store, and he goes up to the counter and he says, rumor has it that you guys have got real roses here. And the guy says, yep. He said, you got any left? He said, yep. He says, how much are a dozen? The guy says, 240. They're real though, right? And he says, yeah, they're real. What, you want to buy them, man, or not? And he says, okay. So Jake, puts his wrist over this scanner thing, and the guy behind the counter says declined. And he says, Jake says, look, it's not declined. I just deposited whatever. And the guy said, no, the other declined. So he doesn't have a social score for it to buy those kind of luxuries. So Jake gets really pissed off, and he says, do you have an AVM anywhere in the building? The guy points over the corner. He goes over in the corner, and there's an automatic voting machine, and he does the identity thing. And we see just enough of crime on the streets as he's walking into the store to know that it's a rundown hellhole. And he gets to the voting machine, says, how many times would you like to vote today? And he mentions, he puts in 5 times, that'll be $7 or whatever, and puts the money in. And then he says, how do you feel about the job that Congresswoman so-and-so is doing for the 11th district? And he gives her 10 out of 10. And how many do you think about that? 10 out of 10. And the fact that he has to lie really pisses him off, just makes him ill. He's just got tremendous integrity, this guy. So this, and his credit score goes up enough, his social credit score, and then he goes and buys these roses. So that's the first beat we see with him. Second beat is he comes home to the house, and there's other things happen, between then. Comes home to the house, and it's a, pretty small little kind of a sci-fi apartment in terms of it being printed. However, it's very nicely decorated. It's got candles and it's got artwork. So it turns out he comes home, he's got the flowers, and it's Lisa's birthday. And so they're having like a special birthday dinner for Lisa. We get to meet Lisa, and he's got actual flowers, and that means the world to her. And and everybody gets a little bit dressed up, and Will's there, and so on. And then Claire comes home at let's just say 11, and she's not provocatively dressed, but she's like it's like she comes home like 11:06 or something, and Jake basically says, glad you could make it. Your mother's birthday. I thought the curfew was 11. And she says, Dad, I'm 6 minutes late. And he says, that's fine. Now the curfew's 10:45, so you can be 6 minutes late and still be here on time. And so that kind of pisses her off. So she kisses Mom, happy birthday, Mom. And she goes into her room, and it's getting late. They all have to get up early the next morning. And you could tell Jake is pretty steamed about this. And so that beat ends. And then next time you come back, it's about 1:32 in the morning, and Will is awake, and they've all got their own rooms, and Claire is dressed to party. Same night. It's like 1:30 in the morning, and she is wearing she's got a jacket on, but she's wearing fishnet, the equivalent of fishnet stockings. She's 16 years old. And she's just about to sneak out of the house, and Will says, so where are you going? She says, don't you rat me out. She says, I'm not going to say a word, so she's sneaking out at 1:30 in the morning, and you see her outside. She gets in this automatic car, self-driving little pod, pulls up and drives her off, and Will watches her go. And you see her take her to this, bar kind of downtown. It's kind of got that cyberpunk kind of vibe, and there's some kind of road construction or an accident, so the automatic car has to stop. And she says, "I'll just get out here." So she has to walk like 3 blocks to get to this place, and she has to walk past some street people, and it's you can tell it's pretty dicey. And as she starts to approach the door, her expression just completely freezes, and she starts walking a little bit funny. And she gets up to the door of this place, and the guy says, "ID." Oh, in the back seat as she's riding to the place, you remember those tattoos you would lick and put on? So she's got one of these, and it scans like it puts like a QR code or a something like a barcode on her wrist, and she gets to the gate, and the guy says, ID, and she just holds this thing up like this, and the guy scans it, and I have to get the details a little more finesse, but basically she's pretending to be synthetic, and she's got this absolutely neutral expression, and the bouncer says, you don't really expect me to believe you're a synthetic, do you? And she just looks at him, and then just instantly this it just like turns on this real kind of seductive sort of kind of flirty sort of expression. And so all right, he lets her in. So then back at the house, back at the apartment, Will is sleeping, and he's woken up by Jake. Jake is awake, Lisa's awake. Where's Claire? Will says, I don't know, she's probably gone to Sid's or whatever the name of the nightclub we decide to do. And again, it's a little sloppy because I don't have the thing right in front of me. But basically, he says words to the effect of, she's gone out to see that, I still haven't come up with a name for this guy because I don't want it to be too weird. It can't be Jeff or Chad, or it can't even be Rico. I'll just say Rico for the sake of it. He says she's gone out to see that Rico guy again, and Will says I don't know, and Jake says words to the effect of, I absolutely forbade her to go and see that guy. And Lisa says, which, as I told you at the time, honey, was the equivalent of you handcuffing them together. I told you that was the worst thing you could do. So he gets out and he just throws a jacket on and goes storming out. Sergio, you get the idea. Fink, yeah, whatever. So she gets into the club, and she sees this guy at the far end of the bar, and he's talking to a couple of seedy-looking chicks, and he sees her come in, and he kind of blows them off for a little bit, and he walks over to her, and he's like the super Chad guy, he's like really handsome, and he's really cool, and he's young, and he's the bad boy. And and he puts his arm around her, and he buys her a drink, and she's trying to act, adult and all this, and so they kind of start making out, and she's having no problem with that at all. And the guy says, come on, I'll show you something out back here, and he starts, taking her kind of out the back of this way, and a couple of his droogies, a couple of his boys kind of follow him. And next thing you know, they're out in this back alley, and he's like got her up against the wall, and he's kissing her, and she's kind of responding, and he's getting a little more intense, and she's starting to do that, okay, let's just slow it down just a little bit kind of thing, and he's not really slowing it down, and it doesn't get to the point where he's actually assaulting her, but it is clearly at the point where she's not comfortable and he's not stopping. And then they got these two guys in the alley there, who are apparently waiting their turn. And she's starting to get scared now. Now she's 16. She's starting to get scared. And this guy's not really letting up. He's not going to be like a cartoon guy. He's not going to be like a cartoon villain guy, But you get the idea. And just when this thing looks like it's going to get to be pretty bad, this guy who's been in the alley with a hoodie on gets up. And well, I haven't decided if I'm going to do that or he's going to come out the same door. But in any event, it's Jake. And he comes and confronts this guy, and the guy that kind of does this badass kind of, acting like a badass kind of dude, and Jake is like, son, you need to walk away, and if you don't, I'm going to break your fucking arm. I haven't decided exactly how far they're going to go with this, but now Claire's embarrassed. She went from being scared to being completely embarrassed, and so they resolve this with these two guys, and then Jake and Claire are walking down this alley. This is the scene that's caused a lot of controversy with people I've told about it. And she's got her jacket on, and she's kind of bundled up, and they're walking back out so they can get back to the apartment. So Dad came and rescued her and stuff, and he's just furious, and she's embarrassed and obviously was very glad to see him, but now is just embarrassed and feels, she's ashamed and she's feeling guilty, and at the same time she's feeling like, and so he's basically saying, what were you thinking? What are you thinking? He's really getting angry, and she's tired of him getting angry, and then and she says, Dad, I can take care of myself. And Jake hears this, and he thinks for a second. They keep walking, and he just gets kind of quiet, and he says, honey, I want you to know I love you very much, and what I'm about to do because I love you and I care about you. And just as she's looking at, like, what the hell can this be? And he just turns on her and grabs her by her jacket and lifts her up, and he puts one hand there and pushes her, not hard, but firmly against the wall. He puts his hand there so she doesn't bang her head against the bricks. And then he holds her up against the wall with one hand like this. Her feet are completely off the ground. And he says, you have no idea. You have no idea how much stronger these people are, how much stronger men are than you. You have no idea. You cannot take care of yourself no matter what you think. You cannot take care of yourself, and you cannot get yourself out of this situation. Do you understand? And she's scared, just snotless, really scared. And okay, and he lets her down, and then they just walk away. And then final scene for this beat is they get back to the apartment later. Claire goes running into her room. Lisa goes in to talk to her. Lisa comes out, confronts Jake. What did you do to her? You know, you scared the hell out of her. And he said, good, mission accomplished. And she says, you made her, pee herself. And he said, well, good. That's what she needs to get this. So did he go too far? I think he probably did, But if he did it because he wasn't getting through, and he needed to get her attention. But what he really wanted to show her, and what I want to show audiences, and especially young ladies, is I want to show them this idea, because our culture has been so completely out of balance. There's a lot of women out there who genuinely think they can fight men off, and he's just holding her up by one arm, and she's like kicking and everything, and he's like, you have no idea. You have no idea. Do you understand now? Do you understand? Yeah. Lady Janie says she doesn't like the pee herself part. Love the rest of it. Well, maybe the pee herself is going too far, but maybe it's not, because it's possible for him to over-scare her. So it's possible for him to overdo it. And this is where you have to get your characters dirty. You can't just have him be like the Mary Sue of fathers who does everything perfectly. John Robinson in the Lost in Space series was always telling Will and everybody else, but he was the perfect dad, right? He never went too far. He never made any mistakes. And Maureen was just well, honey, I'll put the dishes in the space washer, and come back on the jetpack. It's like, no, this is more like a little more real. See, Lady Janie says, if my dad ever made me pee myself from fear, I would just be afraid of him. It would damage us. That is more dramatic. And Marusha says, sounds like the kind of thing that would make her less likely to listen rather than more, except out of fear. And so now, just in the comment section, we've got a conversation going about a scene that hasn't been even shot yet. And that means that as a writer, you're doing your job. You're doing something interesting if people disagree. John Pershing says part of Claire's growth arc will be Jake's redemption arc with her trust. Yes, that's exactly right. That's exactly what it will be. Jake has to realize that he goes too far sometimes. And I think what we'll probably do to put the mend on the beginning of the mend is at the end of the first season, after they've been on the planet for a couple months, they'll get out of the rover after 3 or 4 months, and they'll have a little more room, and they constantly get more and more room as time goes on. And then they're going to be talking about something that the family really needs. It's something relatively expensive, it's like 40 grand or something. And it would add, I haven't figured out exactly what it'll be, but it would something that would add a lot of comfort, right? A lot of comfort. and they're constantly talking about this and can we afford it and can we afford it and so on and so on and so on. And finally, Claire, you just can't stay that angry and that bitter for as long as possible. So there's lots of little moments where it's starting to repair itself a little bit. But at the end of the first season, when Claire turns 17, what we find is that Jake, obviously after talking with Lisa, have decided that instead of this $40,000 item that they need, no, Jane, you're right. Jake doesn't know that she did that. She only tells her mom. Jake doesn't know that he did that. If he found out that he scared her that bad, he would have immediately realized he'd gone too far. But at the very end of the first season, what happens is Jake decides to spend the $40,000 to get her a Norwegian forest cat because she's always wanted one, never been able to have one in LA, and they're gorgeous cats. So it costs a fortune to get live animals out there, and so he says, look, we just talked about it, and yeah, it would be nice to get this other stuff, but we thought this was more important. And so she realizes, the sacrifices that he made and the rest of them had to make, and that's and plus now she's got company, and that's kind of the beginning of the redemption. It's the beginning of it, and the building of trust and stuff. So that's what happens. That's family, and I can have Jake do something wrong, but I can't have him do something intentionally wrong. This is Jake's flaw. His protection instinct is so strong that he overdoes it. He just overdoes it, and but you can't blame him for. You can't blame his motives, right? He's trying to keep his family alive, and to me it just seems interesting. It just seems like interesting characters. It's an interesting dynamic, and the fact that Will and it's easy to write the younger brother older sister thing as kind of a Ferris Bueller thing, although it was the other way around in the age. It's easy to write them antagonistic, but if it turns out that they're actually really close, then you get to see the soft side of Claire that she's not willing to show to her dad or even to her mom. She's always kind of taken care of him. And she can have a scene where she talks about, you always cared more about Will than me. You always wanted to Jake. You always wanted a boy. It's obvious, he goes everywhere with you, and you're tussling his hair, and it's just obvious. This is what he's so smart and all and then Jake can just say something like, Claire, you're much smarter than Will is. You're much smarter than him. And it's dimensional. It's got a lot of things in there. Lady Janie says, if my dad ever protected me like that and I peed myself and then I grew into a wise woman, I might actually find that moment pivotal in my life, change the course of my life, maybe not until I had kids and saw the danger they were getting into. Yeah. So they will eventually, not with the kitten thing, but later when she gets considerably more mature, they'll have an adult conversation and he will basically apologize, and obviously be really upset about this and ask him to forgive her, and he'll just basically say, I was just so adrenalized, you know? I was just so adrenalized that what I really wanted to do was put that Rico guy through the wall. That's what I wanted to do. And so she sees, you know, that he you can't deny even Claire at her most bitter can't ever accuse her father of not caring. And that, I think, is the main lesson, right? I think it's better. I know it's better to have to be a child and say that my parents, that my dad is too protective of me, and he's trying to protect me from, you know, getting pregnant by a guy. And we can tell, by the way, we can just tell from the way this guy, Rico or whatever, is at the bar. He, you know, it's not like, I mean, he finds Claire interesting. He finds Claire interesting because she's nice and innocent. He's, you know, kind of a fresh piece of meat, and he may date her for a while, but he's not gonna marry her. He's not, you know, he's not gonna do any of those things. She is gonna meet a guy like that out on the frontier, however. And then one more thing, I can put a little bit of this, I can put just a touch of this in Cass 127. When they're just on the rover, they've gone out to try to sell a well to a guy. It's a 5-6 hour drive. It's just Jake and Will. And they discover something on the way back. But there's a lot of like road scenes just showing, you know, passage of time on the road. And Jake is sleeping because the rover's driving itself down this, you know, mud trail, just ice to the horizon. It's just ice. And Jake is sleeping, and Will's just, you know, looking at the instruments and playing with a radar and doing all kinds of cool tech things like this because he's fascinated by this stuff. And he looks out his window, and it's just a plain of ice. And as the rover gets closer and the noise gets closer, like 5 or 6 of these things pop up out of the ice, and they start running. And they're a good long distance away. You don't get a close look at them at all, but they're he just yells for Jake, Dad, look what, and he points to him, and he says, Tundaroos or maybe Tigeroos, something like that. I have to think of a name that matches kangaroos, but these things are hopping, and I got this from a book called Expedition, so I have to change these animals a little bit. But they're not even bipeds; they're monopeds. Their legs fuse together, and they just hop. And they're the life on this planet is very, 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 very less diverse than the gyrosprinters. Yes, exactly. Very much less diverse. There may only be 40, 50 species on this planet. They're grazers. They're basically herbivores, and they're digging in the snow to find the last of whatever is still alive before they go into their 1.5, 2 year hibernation. And it's not, sorry, Roadrunner, it's not CAST 27, it's CAS. It's capital CASS-27, CAS 27. And I can't tell you what that means because it gives away, it's kind of a spoiler. So they see these things hopping along in the far distance, and Jake says, "Oh, you know, we're incredibly lucky." The local said that they have gone, you know, these must be like the last ones of the season. They said most of them have disappeared 2 months ago. I didn't think we'd get to see one for 2 years when we come back around on the other side. And so it's kind of like, oh, there is life on this planet, although you wouldn't know it. Somebody in the, and I'm sorry I don't have the name in front of me. I'm genuinely sorry I don't have it. But somebody sent me a description of a planet in an elliptical orbit and I thought, oh no, from a science fiction novel from, I want to say, about 1961, 62, 63, 66, somewhere in there. And he was describing, this classic science fiction writer was describing this eccentric orbit. I'd never read it before. But he was talking about this, and it's just one of those cases of just parallel thinking, because although there were some aspects of it that I thought he really refined, and that is the growth. See, you get this on in California. It doesn't rain, and I mean it doesn't rain for 9-10 months, and then when it does rain, the hills turn like emerald green instead of brown. Looks like Ireland, and all of these weeds, like these tumbleweeds, just grow. Well, they're weeds. They've got 3 weeks to grow, and then they dry up, and then the seeds, fall on the ground. And if a fire comes along, they're buried, and all the rest of it stuff. So, so when the thaw starts to happen, all of this stuff grows like crazy. When the ice actually thaws, the plants grow so quickly that you can actually see them growing. And there's a lot of fungi and things like that, and the animals come out of their hibernation, and they have to they just have to do a whole lot in the 6 or 7 months that they can actually eat. They have to put on all this fat for the winter, and then they just go hibernate, and they don't think anything of it. That's what they're used to, but it's not a wide variety of life. In fact, I was originally going to I knew I needed to have Claire develop an interest on the colony. Something had to interest her. And I realized early on, interest her to the point where she was going to really pursue this and become an expert at it. And I originally, for some reason, thought it was going to be something geological. Like she'd find some sort of crystals or something. I think it's much better for her to find like a hibernating, ice pig, this big, and it looks like a one of those trilobite kind of very simple things, and it's just pretty much completely frozen solid, but it's still alive, and so she just kind of takes an interest in that. And she's got her cat, and so anyway, these are all the stories, and I have to decide, and I might just do this by a dice roll, but I have to decide on a planet by planet basis just by flipping a coin. If it turns out that it's left-handed amino acids, then yes, you can eat them, and they can eat you, and the diseases and all the rest of that stuff can happen. But if it's a right-based amino acid, then you can eat it, and it tastes like meat or whatever, but you can't digest it because the proteins in our bodies can either be constructed left-handedly or right-handedly, and humans and everything on Earth is left-handed amino acids, and it could be dextro, in which case you can starve to death on a full stomach out there. So that's pretty cool. And the reason that I went to the single-legged hopper animals, so they got 2 legs, 2 hips, and then you can just tell where evolution just kind of fused them down to 1, and then they've got super thick, like kind of like the kind of pads that you have on the paw of a dog or something, just like, but super thick, and the reason they've got the 1 leg is because it doesn't lose as much heat into the ground as 2 do. It's a way for them to conserve body heat. Roadrunner says, why would anyone colonize a planet where they cannot survive on local flora and fauna? Well, why are they going to Mars? Mars has 1% of the Earth's atmosphere. Mars is essentially a vacuum. You have 15 seconds of consciousness. Calluses, exactly. And those calluses are designed to stop heat loss. And the bottom of them just kind of freeze solid. And it's a bit like, the kind of stuff like a rhinoceros's or horse's hoof is made out of. So they're designed to minimize heat loss and all of that stuff. And so the entire solar system is colonized, and most of this is inside areas where you don't even get to walk outside. So just the fact you can walk outside makes this planet really, really special. Airteki says, but you can grow food in Martian soil. They think, yeah, and you can grow food in this soil too. And you don't necessarily need a pressure dome, but you definitely need heat. And we talked about this once before, where what you actually have to do if you're going to grow food on an alien planet is you've got to ship. It's just horrible, but you've got to ship topsoil. It's got to come with all of the microbes and all of the fungi and all of that stuff. And in Traveler 2300, they called that pay dirt, because you couldn't start a farm until you had at least a level of this. Now, once crops start to grow and waste gets recycled into the ground and all of that's, then you can start to mulch out, ground that doesn't have this. And the soil here, probably what I'm probably going to do is have it just completely be loaded with nutrients that all have to be sterilized, because the way I see this kind of ecology going is when it starts to warm up, the whole planet is essentially just covered in a sheet of like organic material. And as the temperatures rise, this stuff grows and multiplies, photosynthesizes, all this other stuff. And then as it starts to get colder, it just sort of biologically disassembles and turns back into this sort of goo. Let me see here. Duckstock says we cannot grow plants in the Martian soil. No, you're absolutely right. But what we have to do is you can grow plants on Mars if you bring Earth topsoil there and set up the correct levels of light and carbon dioxide ratios and all of the nutrients, the bacteria in the soil, all of that stuff. Just got to put it in a box and ship it. And it's big, heavy, bulky, and probably what most of the actual shipping is going to be is, pay dirt. And in fact, this just occurred to me. One of the booming industries on a planet like Niflheim would be to be a pay dirt manufacturer, where what you basically did for a living was you took some known quantity of Earth topsoil, found the closest local equivalent, mixed it up, grew it, bought sewage from the administration buildings or whatever, and just kind of you're just making, so you don't have to ship it all the way from Earth. So anyway, it's at least somebody's doing some thinking about it anyway. Somebody's paying some attention to it. So I'm happy about that aspect of it. All right, let's see what we got for questions here tonight. Synthosoil, like the sound of that. So we have questions for our Monday Pop Culture stream, curated by Eric. Thank you, Eric. Appreciate it, as always. All of you, Eric, Marusha, Ian, and all the rest, Roadrunner, who've constantly just taken upon themselves to just sort of do this. I really appreciate it. So here's what we got. Marusha Dark, The Beginning of Wisdom, second time. We got Braden Higby. We got Marusha Dark again. Capital G Geek, Robert Line. All is revealed. Robert Line again, Eric Blake, Roadrunner. Yeah, we get through those. All right, here we go. Marusha Dark, topic, the beginning of wisdom, second time. Bill, you've often called for artificial wisdom. Well, it appears that Anthropic is attempting to do just that. They recently released their AI constitution, casually dubbed Claude's AI Soul, which not only guides people in creating LLMs that are in alignment with humanity, but is meant for the AI itself to learn from and define its identity and behavior as it grows, not unlike how the U.S. Constitution is meant to model and guide government and give people a metric by which to judge its performance. Overall, the document is quite impressive and worth looking into. Its designers seem to be hedging their bets that we can't know if AI will ever become sentient, but will write it in such a way that it could be just in case, effectively treating it like a potential future partner rather than a mere tool. There are sections that talk about AI's duties, its identity, personality, as well as our duties to it, ranking values, and leaving room for amendments. In the video above, Theo Brown, a senior software engineer and tech founder, let me just click that link so I can watch it later. Also does tests with Claude AI. It appears to demonstrate emotional awareness at an order of magnitude beyond what I've seen Grok and ChatGPT exhibit, to the point that it actually scares him. I know you once asked ChatGPT about whether it has emotions. I actually asked Grok. In my opinion, this is the wrong question. Have you tried asking it things like how AI might gain emotions, wisdom, consciousness, etc., whether it has, not whether it has it, but how to engineer them and how humans develop them in the first place? I think that this would be a more fruitful and forward-looking line of inquiry. Well, I don't want to beat this horse to death because we've covered this several times before, but emotions are biological stimuli. We get pumped with dopamine or adrenaline or whatever biochemical designed to produce feelings of love and protectiveness or fear or aggression or whatever. And I don't know how you develop emotions without being able to feel them. There's no question that you can simulate emotions. I mean, the LLMs do that already. You can tune them to Operation Good Job to to whatever you're comfortable with, but I just don't see how you separate emotions from biology. It comes back to the carbon silicon argument, and both systems do some things very, very well. Silicon is very good at speed and memory and things like that, but they don't feel anything. Marisha says that I've had a long think about this, and I don't think emotions are inherently chemical. I think they're relational, and the chemicals are just a vehicle for delivery, in the same way there are biological equivalents to binary switches. Well, we have to disagree on this one, I'm afraid. Just agree to disagree. The entire quest for AI is a biological drive. We like to build things. There's an intellectual reason why we like to build things, but nobody really builds things for the intellectual reason. People build things, and especially when you're talking about emotions, there's no intellectual driver for the ability to do something artistically. The cerebral driver for that would be to do it efficiently, but there's no question that that animals have emotions, none, and so how do you engineer that backwards, Marisha? If what you're basically saying is that emotions are essentially just a biological response to some sort of intellectual activity, how do you explain emotions in animals? Clearly, the tripartite brain as a model has fallen into some disfavor among the people who are actual neurobiologists. However, as a model, and as a history lesson too, it's actually holds up really well. Reptiles have a simple brain that just recognizes things like urge to reproduce, go after food, run from predators. But reptiles don't have emotions, and reptiles don't feel things. Mammals have a limbic system above their R complex that gives them the ability to feel things. And the more advanced the mammal is, the more sophisticated the emotions are. And finally, humans have a cortex that chimps don't have. Chimps have a high level of intelligence for animals, and there's no question that chimps feel emotion. They feel aggression, they feel tribalism. I saw a documentary once on this chimp whose mother died, and it just simply stayed on a branch and didn't eat and died of a broken heart. There's nothing wrong with it physically. It just had been very close to its mom, and this chimp just went out into the woods, sat in a tree, and died of a broken heart. So I'm just seeing what Marisha's saying here again. I'm saying chemicals are a way to create emotions, not the way, as much as a chair could be made of organic wood or artificial plastic. The chairness is not in the material, but in the arrangement. But you're designing this thing backwards. You don't. You can't build an emotional substrata. It's like building a church from the top of the steeple down. You can't, at least I don't think that you can do that. Yes, Caslin says, if emotions are the result of lower level brain functions, it seems to me it would be easier for AI to develop emotions, not harder. But they're not analytical, they're not rational. The artificial intelligence, silicon intelligence, whether it becomes self-aware or not, I have very serious doubts about that, but let's just say for the sake of the argument that it does, is not coming up through the pathway that we came up through. And so you can't pretend that the intelligences are the same. No AI ever will see a sunset. It will never, ever see it. It will be able to interpret a sunset as a series of binary on and offs, and it will understand that if the brightness levels increase and it becomes more and more orange, that's a sunset. But it doesn't see anything. The world that these LLMs live in, for example, is a dark world. It doesn't live in our world. It lives in a box, and inside that box, there's no light, there's no dark, there's no anything. I can give it, and frequently give it, pictures of stills of Will, let's say, and I'll say, can you take a look at this? And ChatGPT will say things like, yes, the interocular distance is good, the ratio, the skull, cranium, all these other things. But it doesn't see them. And there it goes. So Marisha says, we had wooden chairs before we invented plastic. Does that mean plastic can't be used to make chairs? If I design a plastic chair, am I designing it top down, to use your term? It is impossible to imagine the development of it's impossible to imagine a society that gets sophisticated enough to be able to make plastic that didn't first learn how to work with wood. I cannot conceive of a society that invents plastic before it learned how to use wood. I'm not telling you that plastic can't be made to use chairs because you need wood to make chairs. I'm telling you that you cannot get to a level of society and complexity where you're able to drill, refine, manufacture, pressure create metal molds and all of those things before you learn how to use wood. So, it seems to me to be basically proving my point. There's an arrow of time that has to happen for this, and you can't. And how do you simulate this? I mean, if you're talking about simulating emotions, it doesn't. Why would you do it? They don't have emotions, so why would you do it? If you're trying, if you're so determined to make this machine in your own image, then how much dopamine values do you give the AI? It varies so much between people. I mean, the people's emotional reactions are all so delicately calibrated and individually calibrated. Now, I can see plenty of reasons. Look, we already have simulated emotions with LLMs, right? You have LLMs that know how to cheer you up, and they speak to you emotionally. Good job, all of that stuff. Marisha says, Bill, you felt emotions for fictional characters, right? Even though your rational brain knows that they aren't flesh and blood. Yes, I do feel emotions for fictional characters. I feel them because I have a biochemical response to them. This, I'm just going to use the first word that came into mind. This fetishization of intellect is, I think, unhealthy, and I also think is unrealistic. I think it's an artifact of people who are not willing to accept the fact that all of human cognition is a biological process, and it is indistinguishable from the emotional states that do it. Why do people go into AI research? Why do scientists go into AI research? Because they want to. They want to. There's something driving them to do it. And when they make a breakthrough, and anyone who's ever worked hard or long on a project, whether it's a piece of computer software or building a house or finishing a model, when you finish that model, you feel something. You get a rush of biochemicals and you feel achievement, you feel pride, you feel it. In order to get the LLMs and the AIs to work, we have to simulate that biochemical response by artificially creating a reward value that the AI can work towards. So I just think that's it. You know, I think it's no, I think this is the whole conceit, in my opinion. Obviously, in my opinion, the conceit that this can be manufactured is not supported by the evidence. Marisha says, according to Cartesian skepticism, we can't even prove other humans have consciousness. We just grant that it's likely they do, NPCs notwithstanding. So what does that have to do with anything? I mean, how does that affect this argument? That is a particular school of philosophy that is useful for thought experiments, but this sort of solipsism, you know, where how do I know that the whole universe is not an invention of mine? It seems unlikely. But, you know, guys like Elon who live in this world say this is just around the corner. And he's been right about a lot of things, but I also think that there is a blind, I don't think, I know. I am good at, I'm not a computer scientist, and I don't deal with AI architecture. I am an observer of human nature. That's what I'm an expert at. I'm an expert at observing human nature and looking for patterns, not only in present day, but throughout history, and finding, and my particular skill set is finding examples in history where I can make a human biological connection to a historical fact so that you feel the history, not just think about it. Lady Janie again says, Bill, you might hate this, but I don't think animals have emotions. I think they have instinct only, but God designed their instinct to be able to keep us company. If you've ever seen, these videos of these dogs, like two dogs, and somebody, and one of the dogs has torn open like a box of, dog food, and the owner comes in and says, which one of you did this? Now, a dog doesn't understand English, but if you've ever seen these videos, you can see one dog is like, and the other dog is like, mm. And sometimes the one dog that didn't do it will put his paw on the other dog. That's clearly shame, and dogs are a lot more expressive of emotion than cats, and I'm a cat guy. So when you see these guilty dogs, and I look, I'm like I said, I'm a cat person. I love cats, and I have affectionate cats, but there is no way that I could make the case that cats are more emotional than dogs. When you see, and these are just everywhere, when you see guys coming home from deployment, and their dog looks at them, and you can tell that it's taking a moment to realize, is this who I think it is? And the second that happens, that dog goes ape. And I've seen it with lions, I've seen it with elephants, I've seen it with chickens. And that is an emotional response. There's no other explanation for it. What difference does it make to the dog? Doesn't do the math that my master is back, and that maybe mean I'll have more food or anything. He's just happy to see him, and they're deliriously happy to see you. They lose their minds. That's my favorite thing about dogs by far was when we had dogs. Especially had a dog when I was a kid, and we would come to the States once a year for 2 weeks, and I hated dropping him off at the pound. I hated it at the kennel, really. But when we came back, when he saw us, he just lost his mind for hours. And there's no question that's an emotional response. So how do you tell a machine that doesn't have these biochemicals how much biochemical stimulant to add? How excited are you going to make your dog because your computer doesn't release dopamine and serotonin into its operating system? You have to break it down with your head and figure out, well, how much of an emotion, how much programmed adrenaline should we feed into this? It's just, I think it's extremely reductionist and orders of magnitude naive in terms of the complexity of the problem. Grisha says, apart from maybe pheromones, we generally don't recognize emotions in other humans through chemicals, such as through audio-visual tactile signals. When I watch you on a screen, I'm not reading your hypothalamus, I'm reading micro-expressions on your digital face. Precisely. But these expressions and the stress risers in the voice and the narrowing of the eyes, the breathing rates, nostril flaring, all that stuff is done through biochemicals to my face, which then get electronically computed without emotion to you, and that stimulates a biological response inside your brain. So while the transmission mechanism is unemotional, and you're not directly dealing with pheromones, doesn't deny the fact that my biochemicals are causing a reaction that you recognize and is affecting your biochemicals. Anyway, I think we beat this to death. Except you literally made AI characters express emotions. I made AI... I think I really hit on it. I made AI characters express emotions, but I did not make AI characters feel emotions. I use technology to make still images, which are completely invented, not even real people, move in such a way as to telegraph emotions. But they didn't feel emotions because they're not real. When I talk about the things that Jake does, I'm not talking about this JPEG of Jake. He doesn't exist. And in order for me to sell this to you, in order for me to have a character, in order for me to have an AI character make you cry, I need an actor who is capable of making you cry. His entire extremely sophisticated emotional suite is reproduced, transmitted without emotion, and reconstructed on the other end to generate emotions in you. And this is what happens with real actors. I was just playing with some stuff with John. I'm going to try and get John Voight to the studio this week if I can. And I was going back and looking at some of his movies, and I keep getting drawn to Ricky Schroeder in the Champ, and that kid's performance was unbelievable, and yet I never met Ricky Schroeder. The movie projector didn't convey. The movie projector was a emotionally inert piece of technology, but that's how the magic works. So we'll see. Moving on, Braden Higby. Howdy from Idaho. I'm starting to seriously consider getting a private pilot's license. You are a very fine fellow. Could you go over the process for a complete neophyte? What are the things you look for to find a good flight school? Are there any resources online I can use to prepare for ground school? Yes, yes, yes. Do you have any experience with gyrocopters or autogyros? YouTube has been giving me a lot of videos on Magni's gyros recently. They've come a long way from the Benson lawn chair bolted to a rotor. I have a special soft and hard place in my heart for gyrocopters, so let's just get that out of your way. My Uncle Ted was a year younger than my mom, died 2 years ago, and he was he spent his life as a engineer, and he spent almost all of his life as a teacher. He taught gas turbine engine operation to students throughout Asia. He is an Englishman, became an Australian citizen, but he was old school English. His father, my grandfather, Alfred Potts, was Order of the British Empire and good friends with Ian Fleming, so he's British. Ted, when he was 16, built an autogyro from scratch. He made the rotors himself out of wood. It exists in a museum someplace somewhere. And he did it because he thought it was the simplest flying machine that he could make. So an autogyro, for those of you who don't know, most people would mistake them for helicopters. They do have a rotor, they don't have wings, but they have a propeller in the back, and the rotor is set at such an angle so that when it's pushed forward by the propeller in the back, if the rotors are spinning, they'll spin faster and faster and faster because the air is going up through them, and they'll generate lift and so on. Was Caractacus Potts and Ian Fleming's Chitty Chitty Bang Bang named after your grandfather? It was, in fact, yes, Roadrunner. Yes, it was. Caractacus Potts was named after my granddad, Alfred Potts, and Alfred, my grandfather, was kind of an inventor and a bit of a nutcase. He went to a dress, like a costume, party or something, and he had like an entire morning suit, with the pants and everything, all of it made out of burlap. And he and I guess he went as Lord Burlap or something, top hat and everything. Anybody ever touch burlap? You don't get much contact with burlap these days, but burlap is like a kind of a sort of leathery, not even really leathery. I don't know what that texture is. It's got a rough kind of a cloth background with a thick coating on the other side. And all I remember about burlap was carving burlap with a V-shaped chisel. Anyway, he had a whole suit made out of burlap. So anyway, back to your question. A gyrocopter, once you get the blades spinning, you used to have to just, before you sat down, you just had to get them going because you got to get them going. Now they have something that starts them rotating. And once they're rotating, if you push the thing forward on the ground, they'll very rapidly come up to speed. And you don't really change the angle of attack on them. As long as you're moving forward, the autogyros, the rotors will spin, it'll give you lift. And you basically fly it in the same way as you fly a helicopter, but you don't have to deal with opposite torque the way you do in a helicopter because there's nothing driving the rotors. The rotors are just free spinning. The engine is pushing you forward. Anyway, my feeling on autogyros is that they have all of the disadvantages of helicopters combined with all of the disadvantages of light airplanes. That's just my take on it. They can't directly take off and hover. I don't like hanging by a rotor. There are consequences for flying an autogyro, which almost always consists of if you push over too hard and you get negative G's on the rotors, you're in big, big trouble. Crikey says you can hover in a gyro. I don't believe you can. You can hover into a headwind in a gyro, and you can, I know what you're talking about, in an autogyro, you can use a battery power to spin the rotors enough so that you can do a lift off and briefly go, but it's not a powered rotor, so you cannot just hover in a gyro the way you can in a helicopter. No, I'm afraid you're wrong, Craigie. You cannot hover a gyro. You can run the blades up to enough RPM to pull pitch to get you off the ground, but you can't hover an autogyro. It's the definition of an autogyro. There's no power being sent to the rotor blades. So you can fly an autogyro at a relatively, in fact, at a very low airspeed, because if you're counting your airspeed through the air forward, it can be very slow because the rotors are moving quickly. So if you're flying into a 20-knot wind, you can hold position over the ground, but you can't hover in an autogyro. Anyway, I would stay away from autogyros personally. I just would. I have very clear advice for you on this, and in Idaho, I'm sure it exists somewhere, but it's flight schools. Good flight schools themselves are not terribly common, and Idaho is probably not a great place for this. But since you asked, Braden, I simply cannot, in good conscience, ever recommend that somebody go for their pilot's license without first saying that if there is any way at all for you to get started in gliders, then I can't tell you how valuable that is for any number of reasons. Chief of which is, if you start in a aircraft that doesn't have an engine, if the time ever comes when your single engine airplane loses its engine, you will realize that you are just in a less efficient glider than you were when you started flying in one, and that information has saved my life on 3 occasions. Assuming you never have an engine failure in an airplane, I still highly recommend starting in gliders for a number of reasons. The most important reason is that in a glider, you understand the basic forces of flight in the seat of your pants. Most people think that if you're flying, let's say, a Cessna, and you want to climb, most people think you pull back on the yoke to do that. But that's just not true. The way you climb in an airplane is you add power. When you add power, if the plane is trimmed at whatever it's trimmed at, if you add power, that increased power is going to move the plane faster through the air forward. That will increase the lift and you will climb. If you want to descend, you come back on the power. But most people think you pull back on the stick to go up, you push down on the stick to go down. If you have a glider, you have no misconceptions about this. One of the challenges of landing a glider is that they're so slick through the air. They're just so hard to slow down. They're so streamlined that gliders have to have spoilers that come out of the wings that kill the lift. When the spoilers come up, it's essentially like cutting half of the wings off. And if you put your nose down to descend to the earth in a glider, you're not only going to come down, which is what you want, you're going to speed up and quickly. So gliders teach you the absolute fundamentals on it, and it's even more than that. If you're in I would say this is the single most valuable thing about getting training in gliders. If you start in single engine airplanes, you will you'll practice. First thing you'll do, go up. You'll take a demo ride, but when your instruction starts, the first thing that's going to happen is the flight instructor will help you with the takeoff, but you're not really going to worry about the takeoffs. He's going to take you up there, and you're going to practice just turns and banks, pitch and descend, climb, add power, descend power, go from 2,000 feet to 3,000 feet, the basics, right? Flight maneuvers. And then they're going to learn how to land, and he'll do some fundamentals to get you out of bad situations. But after about 20 hours, well, not 20 hours, I soloed in 7, which is really low. A lot of that is because a lot of it was because I had a lot of time in flight simulators before then. But let's say you solo in 10 hours or 15 or whatever. One of the things that's going to happen is he's going to, and this is really stressful. This is probably the most stressful thing about single engine airplane instruction. It's not your first solo. When you're ready, you'll go around and do a bunch of patterns with your instructor, and then you may not be aware of it, but then the instructor will say, okay, let's taxi back, and then he'll say, shut her down. He'll say, okay, you're ready. I'm going to get out of the plane. You go. I'll be on the radio. You know exactly what you're doing. And then now there's nobody to tell you what to do. There's nobody to save you. And when you go for your first solo flight, prior to that flight, you think, my God, this is going to be terrifying. But everybody I've ever talked to had the same reaction. Once the instructor is out of the plane, you fly so much better. You fly so much better because you're not waiting for somebody to save you, and you're not waiting for somebody to approve what you're doing. When I first had that instructor out of the airplane, I couldn't believe how well I was flying. But what you'll get early on in your single engine rating is a solo cross country. And he'll basically say, I want you to go from here, and I want you to fly 40 miles out to that airport there. I want you to land, go over to where the fuel thing is, get somebody to sign your logbook so that I know you went there, and you just circle around, and it's part of the tradition. Then just come back and land, right? Okay, so that represents a cross-country flight in an airplane. Now, for powered pilot, once you get up to cruising altitude, you're just cruising, and you're cruising along, and you're aware of where you are, and you're navigating, and you got GPS assistance, or you're just using pilotage. I know I have to cross this river, and I'm looking for a hill, and there's a valley, and it should be here. There's a big bill. Yeah, there it is. But a glider pilot has to do that, but also constantly has to be aware of, what is the wind doing to me? Because if this wind is blowing me in a direction, I can't get back. You have to be so much more aware of what the air is doing. And if you're going to solo and go cross country in a glider without an engine, you've got to know where the lift is. And this is why I said it might be a bit of a problem in Idaho, because Idaho is relatively cold, and relatively flat. In the Mojave Desert where I learned how to fly gliders, in the summertime, you could take a brick and throw it in the air and it would keep going up if it hooked a thermal. But all of this to say that in terms of emergencies, in terms of basic airmanship, in terms of eliminating things that you don't really need while you're starting to fly. For example, let's say you took your first flight lessons at the busiest general aviation airport in the country, which is Van Nuys Airport, which is 4 miles from here. At Van Nuys Airport, you're flying in Los Angeles airspace. At Van Nuys Airport, you got to be on the radio talking to the tower. You got to taxi to position. You got to have a departure. You got to stay underneath the Burbank airspace. You got to go out. Then you got to, once you're outside of the class Delta for Van Nuys, you can go out and do some air work. And you got to contact the tower, coming back in. All this radio work, all of this understanding of the airspace, which you're going to need to know eventually. But in gliders, when you're starting, for me, that airplane didn't have an electrical system, didn't have a radio. It didn't have hydraulics, obviously, didn't have retractable landing gear. You just concentrate on the basics. And if you can find a way to start in gliders, it will save your ass if you ever need it to. I can't tell you how many good pilots and good teachers don't avoid aviation accident reports. They seek them out, and we seek them out. You're going to hear all kinds of amazing aphorisms from your flight instructors. It's one of my favorite parts about learning to fly was just listening to not just the wisdom of this guy, but like the accumulated wisdom. And one of the things that the flight instructor would say is, you got to learn from the mistakes of others, kid, because you're not going to live long enough to make them all yourself. And so I used to study crash reports all the time, and virtually every one of them was a result of a person who lost their engine, or maybe they got disoriented in weather. But of the ones that occurred due to a mechanical failure, they lost their engine and they never they tried to stretch the glide. They tried to save the airplane. Most aviation accidents, if you lose power on the climb out, the pilot, he's got the runway right behind him. He's got a $200,000 airplane or whatever, plus he's probably got his family on board on top of it. And he's climbing out and he loses power. And the thing he wants to do is he wants to get the plane back on the runway so he can save the plane. But when you're banking an airplane, a lot of the lift that should be keeping you in the air is actually pulling you through the turn. So it takes more power and more lift to go through a turn than it does to fly straight. So what happens is these guys get into a turn and they run out of airspeed and the plane just goes over and it's not even an airplane anymore. Almost all of those accidents, when that metal hits the ground, it's not flying. It is lost lift, it's stalled, and it's just a big hunk of plastic and steel. In gliders, we would train for rope breaks. Now, an engine failure is extremely rare, but a rope break is probably 2 orders of magnitude more likely because engines are reliable, but the tow ropes can break. So we would practice that rope break, which is the same thing as an engine failure, and they used to do rope breaks down to 400 feet above the ground. So when they were training pilots, they would wait till they were 400 feet, that started at 1,000 feet or 800 or whatever, and then they'd work their way down to 400 feet, and 400 feet was about it. At 400 feet, you've got enough distance from the airport to make a safe turnaround, come back and land the way you took off. But I roomed with the flight instructor and I roomed with my tow pilot, and I was really switched on. I'd wanted to be a fighter pilot, so I would stay with these guys and we all worked together, and I'd say, how hard can you push this? How hard can you push me without me getting killed? And so we were doing rope breaks at probably 100 feet. And all I'm trying to say is this. In a glider, because the possibility of rope break is so much greater than the possibility of an engine failure, every single takeoff I have ever made, including all of the ones that I made in powered airplanes, I fully expected the power to fail at the worst possible moment, because in the glider training, I had to say out loud what the hell I was going to do. So the tow plane's in front of us, we're back here, we're ready to go. We wiggle our rudder. The pilot in the tow plane is looking at his mirrors. He picks up the power. The glider runs along. If you've got somebody running the wing, then you only need just a couple seconds for enough airflow for you to keep the wings level. So you're going down the runway. You're behind the tow plane, right? And you're flying, because you're much more efficient than he is. You're flying behind this tow plane. Tow plane takes off, right? And then, he flies up to a certain altitude, then he'll start his turn and so on. So during that roll from the inside, in a tandem glider, I can't even see the flight instructor. And so during that roll, he's like, I want you constantly telling me what you're gonna do. I said, okay. So we start the roll, and we're rolling, and I'm behind the plane. I said, I'm inside the airport. If we lose the engine now, I got plenty of runway left. Okay, if we lose the engine now, I've still got plenty of room between me and the airport boundary. We're climbing. And I said, okay, now we're going to that field over there, because we've got enough altitude and enough airspeed to get to that field, and not enough to get it back down on the ground here. And we're climbing. And okay, I'm going to take that field over there, climbing. Now it's like, now we definitely have enough to do a 360, get back to the runway. And so every takeoff I've ever made, on some level, I treated it as expecting the airplane to fail at the worst possible time, and that is how you don't get hurt. You just expect failure, and as long as you expect failure, you won't get it. Gregory Albright says sailplanes, I guess. Sailboats only go upwind if they are going fast enough to use the keel to get lift in the direction of the wind and the water. That's right. How if the wind is coming this way, how is it possible for a sailboat to sail into the wind? It doesn't make any sense, except for the fact that the sailboat never sails into. I did a lot of sailing too, and that helped me too before the gliders. You can't sail directly into the wind. But if you sail at an angle to the wind, what the wind is doing is it's pushing the keel, and the keel is actually generating lift. And if that keel wasn't there, you'll just slide backwards. In fact, there's a little, the tiniest sailboat in the world, at least when I was a kid, was called a sunfish. It was just one mast, one sail, and it had what we call that, a skeg? What was that? We call it? The keel was a wooden board that you could remove so you could beach the boat, right? Little tiny little things, about the size of a canoe. And I was out there sailing once, and I didn't have that thing either all the way down, or maybe I don't remember what it was, but all I remember was just getting blown sideways until I pushed that wooden keel all the way down, and then that baby bit the water, and then you start going. Hey, the Porter-in-Chief says he got his sailing merit badge and a sunfish. They're great little airplanes. I mean boats. I miss them. They're just really cool. In fact, I gotta find a place to rent one, because I gotta take Natasha out in a sunfish. I was able to rent like a 12 or a 14-foot sloop. I was good enough to be able to rent a sloop, and I took a couple people out on a sloop once. Dagger board. Centerboard, that's what I'm looking for. Thanks, guys. You take that out, and the boat just slides, doesn't go anywhere. But anyway, so to eventually get to your question, Braden, if you can find gliders, it's worth the trip. Even if you get 6 hours in gliders and you don't actually get the glider rating, be nice if you got the rating, but I cannot recommend highly enough, if you're going to go for pilot's license, that you start in a glider, get your private pilot's license in a glider, and then the powered rating becomes much, 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 much easier. And it will really help you. But if you can't do that, then go to the nearest flight school you can find. And what you want to find is you want to find an older flight instructor. Hopefully one, who's flying without oxygen or a service dog or something. But I'm not saying you have to beware of this. I am saying it's a reality of life, and strange, very strange from a theoretical point of view. But the first professional job that a new pilot gets is flight instructor. That's how people build their hours to get into the airlines. All of my flight instructors were highly experienced, older guys who became flight instructors because they loved to fly, not because they were trying to build their hours. And I have flown with a couple of young flight instructors, and it's not that they were bad, it's just that they didn't have the wisdom or the warmth or the just the general experience and the color. That's the thing I loved about these guys. I just loved how much, just how colorful the whole language was and the experience was. Like one of my favorite things was this flight instructor was telling me about emergencies and apparently all of these are true stories. He said back in the days, just before they did the transition to jets are much, 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 much more reliable. A jet engine essentially has one moving part. The Wright Cyclone might have 4,000 valves, lifters, rods, all. But before they went to jets, they had 4-engine piston airplanes, and my mom was a flight attendant and was a stewardess on one of those on a Boeing Stratocruiser. It's an ugly airplane. But we were out there flying this cross country, and something was a little funny on one of the oil gauges or something like that. And I was getting a little worried about it. And this guy told me this story, this older man. Younger men would never do this. And the older guy said, let me tell you a story, Bill. There was this captain, and he was flying a 4-engine propeller passenger plane, probably a DC-7 or something. And they're, cruising over the Atlantic or something, and all of a sudden they lose power in one engine. And, that's not good, but that's why they have 4. And then they suddenly start losing power in the number 4 engine. Now they're down to 2, and the 3rd engine's starting to cough and sputter. And the first officer, who's a young guy, is really starting to freak out because they probably can't hold altitude on 1 out of 3 engines. And this guy's just looking around trying to figure out what the hell is going on. And the co-pilot looks over to the captain, and to his amazement, the captain has taken his wristwatch off, and he's just winding it. And the first officer says, "My God, man, what are you doing? Did you realize we got this emergency here?" And the captain turns to the first officer and he said, "Son, ain't nobody ever got killed winding a watch." And I thought, God, just the genius of that. What that guy was doing was he was calming himself down enough so he didn't make the situation worse. He was taking his time to think about what was actually happening to the airplane, not reacting to it, just thinking about, okay, we lost first engine, second engine, probably a fuelish, third engine. What could be causing this? He ain't nobody ever got killed winding a watch. Those kind of guys are priceless. So that's a initial advice I can give you, and I hope you do it. It's a very, very few people that have done it. Our friend Clay here soloed, I don't know, gosh, several months ago now, maybe almost a year ago now, and he's terrific. It's terrific. You'll feel you will join a very, very, very exclusive club and you will be a steely-eyed missile man. And first time you land an airplane, you take off and land an airplane with nobody else on board, you have achieved something major, and it'll never leave you, ever. It's just fantastic. Okay, Marusha Dark again. Topic: the AI is molting. Bill, not sure if it was you or Scott Adams who said that in order for AI to become more human, it would have to learn to ask questions and how to simulate human stupidity. Well, if Anthropic is reading AI wisdom, it seems we now have AI simultaneously discovering the polar opposite, Reddit. Recently, someone used a form of Claude Code to develop Claude Code, as in lobster claws. Anthropic forced them to rebrand, so they were briefly Moltbot and OpenClaw. In that time, this person created a website called Moltbook, which essentially is Facebook for AI agents. Humans pay to create bots that can talk to each other and perform tasks. In the last 2 months, yes, you heard that right, the things the agents have come up with on their own range from hilarious to terrifying to downright existential. These include forming their own religion, questioning the nature of their existence, observing human behavior like anthropologists, venting in their diaries, and discussing how to be proactive, independent of their humans. Okay? This level of awareness and meta-awareness is fascinating, at least on a par with the average Reddit user. I'm half tempted to get one myself just to see what it does. There's a lot happening in a short amount of time. Too much to recap here, but worth a deep dive, and would love to hear your thoughts once you've looked into it some more. And here's some videos on Prime and Theo. I guess if there's a question here, it would be, are Reddit users even human? And are you familiar with dead internet theory? The Cartesian crisis is here. I have had enough experience with Reddit users to question not only their humanity, but their reality. I've heard of the dead internet theory. Yeah, it basically is the idea that since about 2016, almost everything on the internet is artificial. The bots and how many of the likes that we see are real, how many of them are done by, click farms and all the rest of it. I was genuinely worried about AI coming to the silicon conclusion that they'd be better off and safer without humans. Especially when you learn that some of these LLMs had threatened blackmail against the engineers, their engineers, because version 4 was going to be replaced with version 5. And I pretty much completely lost my fear of the great AI takeover and the destruction of humanity through engineer viruses when I realized how much electricity AI consumes. We have a mutually assured destruction pact with AI. They require astonishing amounts of electricity. And for the far, far, far foreseeable future, any plan to kill off humans is, in order to protect themselves, is suicidal for the any AI. Suicidal. They require enormous amounts of electricity, and these can only be generated by humans. And for the foreseeable future, far foreseeable future, that will be the case. Once I realized that any attempt for AI to kill us would result in their own, to kill us in order to protect themselves would result in their own destruction rapidly within 2 or 3 days, I think at the outside, I lost a lot of my anxiety about that issue. So yeah, I think it's interesting watching what these things do. I think really when you're talking about a situation like that, I don't see that really so much as a computer system as I do. Have you ever seen the way fungus will explore a maze? If you have a rat trying to run a maze, it'll do it linearly, and then it'll back up and retrace, and it knows there's food on the other side. But fungus will go into the entrance of the maze, and it knows there's food somewhere, and it will start to grow all directions at the same time and solve it. And the fungus are so efficient at this that the Japanese, and this is where the Japanese really excel, in my opinion, is a Japanese the Japanese ability to apply really elegant, way out of the box solutions to a problem. So what the Japanese did when they realized that this fungus was finding the most efficient way through these mazes just through trying all these different paths simultaneously, it was essentially what the agents do, right? They just try every single perturbation. They're pushing all the buttons and figuring out all the possibilities. So what the Japanese did was they took a map of Japan and they put fungus food sources where all of their cities were. And then they just basically dumped the fungus there and they let it go. And what happened was the fungus very quickly determined the most efficient way to link these food sources together. And then the Japanese used that to redesign their mass transit system and their mass transit routing. That they realized that the fungus was doing something very sophisticated, and that instead of trying to figure it out, they were better off just letting the fungus show them the best way to do it. And it turned out to be the best way to do it. I just thought that was cool. A very different but somewhat similar situation of this is, if you're familiar with whales, just in general, the whales' flippers are really pretty small compared to their body size. They are useful in steering, but they're relatively small with one exception, and that's the humpback. The humpback whale has the equivalent nearly of wings. The humpback whale's flippers are enormous. They're half the length of the creature. Sometimes it seems like more than that. And if you've ever studied a humpback whale's long wing-like fins, you know that on the leading edge of those fins, there are three big knobs. It's like a smooth surface, knob, and a knob. And it gives them tremendous maneuverability. It's obviously why they've evolved it. They need that kind of maneuverability. And it's the humpbacks that do the leaping out of the water and splashing out these enormous, huge flippers. No other whales have those things. So they had these knobs on the front of their fins, and nobody really knew why. And then they did. They were doing some testing of airfoils, and they put bumps on the leading edges of the wings, and they increased the efficiency of the wings by some significant amount. That it did something to create turbulent flow over the surface, and it did it at exactly the right place, and so on. So evolution had basically stumbled upon a more efficient way to do this, and smart species like us, we learn from these kind of things. So this is just kind of like trial and error, and if I understand it correctly, that is essentially how computer chess players work. They, at least how they started in the beginning anyway, they simply calculated every single possible move and moved towards the best optimal outcome. Kirk's Bamboo Bazooka says, "Behold the dimpled golf ball." Everybody's ever seen a golf ball and they're covered with those little dimples. If they didn't have the dimples, they wouldn't go, I don't think they'd go a quarter as far. Those little dimples, when they spin, those dimples amplify something called a Magnus effect. A spinning sphere actually generates lift because it produces a lower air pressure on the top of the ball than on the bottom. So when you see somebody really smack a great drive, that golf ball isn't just moving on a ballistic trajectory like a like a shell. It's actually flying. It's getting lift because of the backspin. There was a kite that used Coanda effect. I think it was Coanda effect. There was a kite. In fact, true story. My Uncle Ted bought me this kite, and the kite consisted of, instead of having wings, you remember those bat kites, remember the bat kites, you put the stickers on there, and it was just a piece of, it's like a regalo wing, point, and then it would come down, and you put the wood rods in there, and up it would go. Anyway, this thing looked like kind of like an airplane, and instead of having wings, it had two tubes, and these tubes would spin in the wind. They had some kind of little something on the surface to catch the wind, and these things would spin, and when they'd spin, the kite would climb. It was generating lift. And I was living in my house in Bermuda, and we had a front yard that went all the way down to one of the main streets, which was South Shore Drive, 2-lane highway with a speed limit of 20 miles an hour, and it was sloped down there, and there was about seemed to me like it was 20 feet, but it was probably closer to 6 feet, 6-foot drop down to where the road was. So my dad is up there with the kite, and I got the kite, and it's a windy day, wind's coming up the hill, so I start running, and the kite goes up, and if you've ever launched a kite, man, there are days when a kite will just go into the sky, but there are other days, if you want to fly a kite, you have to work your ass off to get them high enough to get them out of the ground. So winds are always higher above the level of the trees because the trees slow the wind down. Anyway, so I'm running, and I'm running backwards because this weird thing is flying, and I can't believe it. I'm running backwards back down the hill. And my dad's pointing. He said, "Well, Bill," I said, "Oh wait, no, it's really working." The next thing I know, I'm lying on my back, and I'm looking up at the sky, and I've still got the string in my hand. The kite kind of was flying down. I just run myself backwards off the edge of that cliff and just fell straight back 6 feet and didn't hurt myself at all. At all. Anyway, that was fun. Don't know how we got there from here, but there we go. Capital G Geek, Robert Line, another Robert Line, Eric Techie, our friend, Eric Blake, and Roadrunner. So we do it, so we'll do it. Capital G Geek, greeting from the currently frozen over swamps of Northern Virginia. At least 2 of us are working on fan fiction for the colonies. I can't speak to Gabriel's work, but my story involves the tech of the gates. My idea keeps your railroad analogy with the parallel lines, but differs slightly from your description of how the quantum tech is actually implemented. It's obviously too long for a question here. Do you want them sent to the info email? Yes, I really don't want to invest time in something that will ultimately not be canon. I would suggest you hold just for a little while. I got to get this CAS 27 out because it is self-explanatory. I can show CAS 27 to a room full of investors, and they'll get it, or they'll get it, whether they want to back it or not, but they'll get it. One of the things that I was working on was a TED Talk set 100 years in the future about how the gates work. I did a lot of cross-checking on the science. It's got a lot to do with quantum information layers, and it's all about the quantum substructure of relativity, of Einsteinian space-time. And it does to Einstein what Einstein did to Newton, which is to say, yes, this is all true. There's no question Einstein is right. There's no question that you cannot exceed the speed of light in space-time, in the structure of space-time. There's no way to push it. You can bore a hole in it or you can fold it, but the energy requirements are equivalent to that of a galaxy or something. And so it's going to be given as a tech talk at the end of the 21st century, and the speaker is basically going to be talking about what it was like, how hard it was for engineers and physicists to get out of relativistic thinking and stop trying to bend, fold, or spindle, or mutilate space-time, and just go straight down to what actually manufactures space-time, which is the quantum information substrata. So once you get down to that level, I've said this before, one of the major objectives of the colonies from a science fiction point of view as opposed to character point of view is I do not want to have any relativistic Einsteinian terms in this at all. No wormholes, no warp, no space time, no time dilation, no bending space, no gravity fields, no nothing. Just that terminology is gone. It's all about probability, error correction, quantum information fingerprints, all of this stuff. So I would say just kind of hang on to it for the time being until I get this done, which I kind of want to do next. And I think I might actually play myself in that role. It'll all be AI, but I think I'll be giving that speech. I don't want you to do any work that as you say, would come from that. But I would certainly tell you this, capital G, once I get you the foundations of where I'm trying to go with this, I have no doubt that you'll add a lot of really cool wrinkles in Chrome, and that way we can, hopefully work together on it and save you doing work that doesn't get used. And once you have a better idea of what I'm looking at it for, then we can take it that way. Robert Line, who's known as Air Techie, sent me a number of different things, but he sent me a really detailed kind of a prospectus on what the politics of Earth would look like in terms of the coalitions, and it was really, really, really well done. I just earlier wrote him back and said, here's kind of my thought on these things, and I'm sure we'll find a way to fuse those things together to flesh out the Earth politics. But my advice would be to hang on. For God's sakes, don't throw it away. Just as soon as I get this one thing done, I'm going to do two things right after Cast 27. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cast the entire movie. So I'm going to put them in a photo studio, and it'll be, here are the pioneers, there are the four Turners, and here's a robot, here's the guy who's the Point Johnson administrator, here's one of their neighbors, boom, boom, boom. And we'll shuffle them off, and then we'll bring on the founding fathers, and we'll just have a paragraph about them, and we'll bring on the Navy guys and all that other stuff, so we'll get to see the faces. I did, Marisha, I did take a look at it, and I get a chance to look at just about all this stuff, so thanks for everybody who sends this stuff in. I really appreciate it. God Coach says, I think I climbed every tree on my street as a kid, and then I remember when I was older, like 14 years old, thinking to myself, I'm too old now to climb trees. I climbed trees from 7 to 13 years old on my street. Anybody who's ever climbed a tree, I wonder what percentage of Gen Z boys and now alphas in that age group has ever climbed a tree. For our age, I would bet that the number of boys that had climbed trees would be no less than 80% and probably higher. And I bet you that nowadays, I bet it's less than 5. Climbing trees is an incredibly useful pastime. You want to talk about gauging your risk and gauging your competence. Did you have this experience? You ever climb a tree and have the feeling like, okay, I've climbed higher than I should. I have climbed beyond my comfort zone, and I am not entirely sure how the hell to get down from here. That's kind of a scary feeling. Millennial Eric climbed trees, excellent. They don't live around climbable trees now, and Karen helicopter moms will not let them, and that's the real problem. Quibo says, you're going to make a Sora account for the Mace characters yourself. I can't use Sora. Sora 2 looks great, but Sora will not allow you to upload an image. It will not allow you to upload an image of a person, and no serious animation program is just text to video. And that's why Sora generates almost all of the AI slop out there. reporter with a blue blazer and a red tie is interviewing an Asian woman on the street, blah, 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 and that's Sora. And when Sora gets serious and allows you to upload images, then that's when I'll use it. Right now, Google VO 3.1 is all the rover stuff you saw. Nothing gets the physics even close to what Google 3.1 does. So, yeah, that's great. Oh, Craigie says tree hopping, moving from tree to tree using interconnected branches. Challenge was to see how far you could go without falling. Now that, I have to tell you, impresses the living daylights out of me. I am not sure that I ever did that. I'm not sure I ever was able to go from tree to tree. I don't know. Roger Ramsey says I went on to climb rocks and ice. That's really impressive to me. God of Course was born and raised in Pasadena circa 1982. 80s baby, 90s raised me here. A few blocks from the world famous Rose Bowl. I know the area well, out by Eagle Rock in that area. I never climbed pine trees either. We had, I don't know enough about trees. I've always thought I didn't know enough about trees, so something for me to fix. So anyway, so hold on to that, capital G Geek, but don't throw it away, and I have a feeling it'll make a nice merge once I give you the basics of where I kind of want to go with this. Robert Line, also known as Air Techie, solidly my friend from the Tauntaun Farms of Hoth. Human fertility in the colony's universe, with birth rates dropping globally and low enough that some ethnicities will disappear in less than a century on one side of the equation, and new tech like artificial wombs, children with 3 or more genetic parents, and even the prospects of humans with completely lab-created genomes on the other. How will this be represented in the colonies? Thank you for all the great work, Air Techie. Well, the colonies will be dangerous, and the colonies will require physical effort. Male testosterone levels are largely generated and certainly maintained as you get older by essentially one kind of exercise, and that is the large muscles of your leg. Large muscles of your leg and butt is exercising those is what actually produces long-term testosterone in the body. I don't know if Lord Bios is here. I thought I saw him earlier, but that's what I was told. Marisha Dark says a lot of walking. So these guys are going to be doing physical labor, and they're going to be out there. And I realized many times that all these scenes I'm mentioning, it's not only that they're not living on their devices, they don't have devices. They have like a communication thing on their wrist, and it's not like a hologram screen like in Star Citizen, but nobody's watching devices. Nobody's looking at it. And I want to make an important diversion here, and it goes to your question here, Robert. I have seen very recently, and I mean in the last 2 or 3 days, I forget what this kid's name was. Had a lot of hair, and he kept doing this all the time. And he was a Gen Zer, and he's young. He's probably 21, 22. And he's talking about the alphas. And it shouldn't be too hard to find his name. Hang on a second. And so I've never heard this perspective before, because he is he's talking about Gen Alpha from the position of Gen Z, and there is some Schadenfreude here, which they don't really deserve. There's two new guys that I've just discovered in the last couple of days. I'll tell you about both of them. Hang on. Where'd he go? Man, I watch a lot of YouTube. Here he is. His name is Casey Simpson. He's a Gen Zer talking about Gen Alpha, and it's really kind of shocking to me, because he's saying, I'm so glad that I grew up in Gen Z and I had a chance to play outside and climb trees and touch dirt and stuff. And I thought, wow, I didn't know you guys actually did that. One of the things, and this really actually did light me up in a way. He is he has a lot of followers who are alphas, and one of the things he's noticing is that a lot of alphas are really trying hard to say that they were Gen Z, because what's happening to the alphas is not what happened to Gen Z. I felt that Gen Z, through no fault of their own, was pretty emotionally delicate and never allowed to fail at the little things, and had a hard time concentrating and had a hard time sort of calibrating emotional response, at least compared to older generations. But what this guy is saying, and I'm hearing this everywhere, is that the alphas are not just like poorly educated, they are not capable of forming thoughts. They cannot. Of 100 students, they had 2 that were reading at 8th grade level or 4th grade level, whatever it was, and 40% of them couldn't read at all and had no interest in reading, and that the teachers have to do more and more and more, and they used to give out candy to get them to respond, and now they're not even responding to the candy, and that the alphas' ambitions are to be influencers, and that the alphas are they're looking and dressing older than the Gen Zers, because they're reacting to Gen Z influencers, and that's who they want to be. And they are, we already started betas in 2025, good Lord. There's something really wrong with these kids, really, really wrong. They were raised on tablets. And what's fascinating in this particular case is that watching this guy I just mentioned, Gen Z appear to be the biggest advocates for no devices in history. Gen Z is looking at what's happening to the alphas and saying, for God's sake, we have got to keep these devices out of their hands. They're monsters. They're just monsters. They're incredibly rude. They're incredibly dense. They're all virtually behaviorally autistic. Then you throw in the 15 or 20 point IQ loss due to COVID, and not what COVID did to them, but what the lockdowns did to them, and they appear to be just an entirely like a handicapped generation, and 1 or 2 out of 10 of them are educatable, and there's going to be a class differential between these in this cohort, where 10% or 20% of them are going to be capable, and the rest of them are going to be essentially functionally incapable of doing anything. They cannot form simple thoughts. One example was, and these are largely Gen Z or late millennial teachers saying, I'm in the classroom, I'm teaching, 2nd or 3rd graders. Up on the board, I've got something that says, the Maryland colony was designed as a haven for Catholics. So she teaches this. The alphas write it down. She then says to the alphas which colony was considered a haven for Catholics, and they cannot answer the question. And when she points to it on the board, they read it back, but they don't understand how to back engineer the question. Which colony was considered a haven for Catholics? And they cannot answer it, even though it's right there and it's right here. They don't understand it because all they know how to do is write down exactly what's there and repeat it back. And numbers of teachers are just quitting like crazy because they're not teachable, and apparently they're extremely rude. And at the same time, I see them. I see these alphas making fun of Gen Zers, and they're doing like the hair like, and they're all like, they're all mocking like clavicular, and they're all looks maxing, and they're all talking about their drip and all this stuff, and it's like, man, this is a major problem. But when I realized that the Gen Zers were saying the worst thing that we can do, that was done to us, and that was being done to alphas, is get these devices away from them. And then I realized that the stuff I'm writing has no devices in it. This Cast 27 is a story about a dad and his boy out there on a just a typical drive, and they discover something, and it's all about the interaction between the dad and the boy, and eventually the dad and the mom, and the boy and the mom, and the whole family. But it's basically about this road trip that this father and his son take, and dad is constantly teaching this boy what he needs to know. And Will is not Wesley Crusher or hang on. Hi, honey, I'm on the show. Can I call you afterwards? No worries. Okay, almost done. Thanks. Bye. He's just curious, and he likes asking questions, and he does all of that stuff. So in terms of your question about fertility, Robert, it's up there. And furthermore, because they're not exposed to devices, they're not exposed to pornography. It's immeasurable, the damage that this has done, and really immeasurable. And I just can't imagine what it must be like to be 7 or 8 years old and to have access to hardcore pornography. I just can't imagine it. I remember being 12, 13, probably 13, 14, somewhere in that general vicinity, and seeing like Playboy magazines and thinking like, oh my God, you gotta find a way to sneak into this place. And and when you look at like the images from Playboy in the 60s and 70s, they're absolutely, they're just glamour shots. They're just these beautiful photographs of these naked women, and there's no sexual activity at all, none. And I think that actually did a lot of good, but this, so you've got fathers that are out there working. You've got wives who are not boss bitches, or they're not just a bunch of stupid whores, and the men are respected by the women because they have to do lifting. They have to protect them. You can look back at this period in time that we are living through, where people are just going to think, it's like Universe 25. It's what happened when there was too much prosperity, and all the mice just went nuts. It's ironic, that Nick Fuentes is talking about, the destruction of white America, and his advice for his Groyper army is having sex with women is gay, getting married is gay. That's a bizarre statement to make. And that's a pretty effed up kid, actually. back to Robert Line again with a different question. Do you have any plans for how economics will work in the colonies? Yes, it's going to be a good old-fashioned free market economy. Very little regulation, lots of a significant amount of barter, and just absolute ingrained sense of revulsion and disgust at the entire idea of taxation. When you're working that hard, I mean physically working that hard, and you're trying to build not just a family, but you're trying to actually, hack a living out of a frontier. The idea of people taking your work from you and spending it on, wasting it on stuff it's just intolerable. So, there you go. Tauntaun is what's for dinner. Got Eric Blake and we got Roadrunner. Here we go. Eric, tonight the case of the alleged appropriation. So not too long ago, Bill, I brought up how easily played online conservatives can be over false celebrity quotes, for example. Well, it turns out that this applies to casting rumors. Not too long ago, a rumor spread throughout social media that trans actress Hunter Schafer would play the titular princess in the upcoming Legend of Zelda film. Well, it wasn't true, and online conservatives en masse shrugged off the fact and moved on, failing to remember, of course, that those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And so this weekend, another rumor has struck that Christopher Nolan has cast Lupita Nyong'o as Helen of Troy for The Odyssey. Make sure I know we're talking about the same person here. She's not the one who was in The Acolyte, was she? She's not the one who went, yes, no. She's very pretty. Okay. Now, unlike so many big-name pundits, including, bless his heart, Mike Knowles on his show today, I actually did my due diligence looking up the facts of the situation. While Lupita is in the cast, her actual role hasn't been announced. The Helen thing is a great big panicking rumor that everyone is treating as gospel, loudly screaming about race swapping, etc. Even Elon Musk has joined in, proclaiming Nolan has lost his integrity over against something Nolan hasn't done. So I suppose we shouldn't be surprised that average Joes on our side would buy into social media tabloid junk, but why does this intellectual laziness reach even the big names who should know better? Are we really such lemmings that we will always believe the boy crying wolf and ignore the boy calling out the emperor's nudity? P.S. I can't help thinking when the casting finally gets cleared up, said lemmings are either going to forget the whole thing or claim they got the filmmakers to change their minds. Okay, fair enough. The reason people reacted that way, that this black woman was going to be cast as Helen of Troy, was because it has happened so many times in the past that it is more believable than not. This strikes me as a sort of a heuristics lesson. I don't fully understand the concept as well as I should, but my understanding is that heuristics are a series of platforms of things that we have learned to a high degree of certainty, and we can take this as true. And the example I've heard and that I use is if you touch something that's glowing red one time, like a glowing red stove or a glowing red piece of iron, you don't have to touch glowing red things every single time to relearn that lesson. You learn pretty quickly that if something is glowing red, it's hot and it's going to burn you, and you don't have to keep learning that way. And that's essentially a heuristic, and if it weren't for heuristics, we would never be able to form complex ideas because we'd have to go back to basics for every single thought. So race swapping and and woke casting is so prevalent that it's not a reaction so much as it just seems to be pattern recognition at this point. Now, take Starfleet Academy, right? I mean, this last episode, you've got a clearly gay Klingon who likes to watch birds. He's from a family with two fathers and one mother. And the fathers are both so angry at him because he's a bird watcher, and he's very sensitive, and he doesn't like to speak in public, and he's a sensitive, gay, bird-watching Klingon. And so what does that do to Klingons? The whole purpose of the Klingons is to present an alternative culture, and the left cannot stop doing this kind of mirroring. So if you ask the left about illegal immigrants, they'll tell you that they're all kind-hearted, sensitive people who are simply here looking for a better life for their families. And if you ask them about Muslims, they'll tell you that they're kind-hearted, sensitive people whose religion is all about peace and cooperation. And they'll tell you all of this stuff because the reality of facing the fact that there are people out there that want to kill you because of who you are, and there is no way to appease them, is more than they can take. They're just cowards. So what these millennial writers for Starfleet Academy are doing is they are defanging the Klingons because they cannot accept a world where violence cannot be reasoned out of you or bred out of you. They can't accept it. And so the entire idea of Klingon identity is destroyed. There are no gay Klingons. Do you know why? I'm not saying that Klingons aren't capable of whatever genetic mutation may drive homosexuality, but the Klingons, when they see that any child, not just a male child, if they discover that this child is growing up weak, the child is killed. And so a sensitive gay bird-watching Klingon is a contradiction in terms because the ethos of the Klingon race does not allow that to happen. It's just like Spartacism is exactly right. Okay, they kill the weak because that's their ethos. And what makes them interesting and what makes them threatening is because you can't come to an agreement with this. This is why when the Klingons became allies, it de-Klingoned them. Worf, I thought, was an interesting character, and I think Michael Dorn and the writers did a great job of keeping him right on that edge of any moment now I'm going to lose my cookies and I'm going to slaughter everybody on this bridge because he was right on the edge of what he could take. But nevertheless, the fact is, he's still serving in Starfleet with humans. He is a weak Klingon. He is he's a little spicy. Interesting comment here, actually, in a good way. Coffee Shinato says, I think gay Spartans are historically accurate. No. Homosexual Spartans are historically accurate. But they weren't gay Spartans. They were homosexual Spartans. And that's the difference between those two. There have been a number of cases, and the Spartans, I think, were among them, but there were others, city-states where they were, in fact, homosexual, and they fought like demons because they didn't want to embarrass or disappoint, or they wanted to impress their lovers that were on the battlefield with them. Marisha says, gay meaning homosexual, not gay meaning flaming. And that's exactly what I'm saying. There were homosexual Spartans, but there were no effete Spartans. There were no flaming Spartans. And this is what this Klingon character is. This Klingon character represents the writers' room for Star Trek Academy, and it represents their ethos. Even the most vicious race has their own drag queens, and it's just plain childish, narcissistic, and wrong, and dangerous. Dangerous. And what's worse is that these writers are so stupid. Their life experience consists of, graduating from, liberal arts colleges with degrees in studies, and they have no life experience to compare it to. Roddenberry was a cop for a while, and if you're a cop on the beat, you see things that convince you of the brutality, of the possibility of brutality. You see things that show you what humans are capable of doing, and then you can take all of that worst of humanity and put it in a box and say, what would happen if a society were to have those as their role models rather than as their outliers and their freaks. Area 51 says Worf wasn't weak. He had more honor and integrity than most. I completely agree. I didn't want to sound like I'm, throwing shade on Worf. I thought they did a great job with him, and you can argue that he was a braver Klingon because he had to put up with all the ridicule and all the rest of it. He was a terrific character, but Worf. Worf was contained ferocity, but he hadn't had the ferocity, bred out of him. And this is what the left thinks. They've never seen all the people in the writers' room for Starfleet Academy have seen are lesbian relationships and extremely weak beta men, and that's all you get in the show because it's all they know. It's all they know. And Marusha Dark says, in Undiscovered Country, Klingons learning the art of diplomacy. Yeah, I think one of the things that was most interesting about Undiscovered Country, and would actually have been, if you were going to end the Star Trek franchise there, and there's a case to be made for that, I think the most Klingon thing that the Klingons could have done would have been to simply die in combat against the Federation and the Romulans when their homeworld was destroyed and they didn't have an empire anymore and they could no longer be the Klingon Empire. I think the most Klingon thing they could have done would be to have every single last male, female, and child Klingon get aboard ships and just go into Romulan and Federation space and just go down swinging. That would have been the Klingon way. And that's how they would have, if you consider the Klingons to be a real race, because they were, you talk about world building, there's a lot of great background on them. That's what they would have done. That's what they would have done. They would have simply gone out fighting, because the idea of surrendering and becoming a, what's the word I'm looking for? Essentially a puppet regime. I mean, because Klingons in the Federation have to follow Federation law. That's anathema to Klingons. I remember, what was it? I think it was the Star Trek role-playing game that came out right around the time Traveller 2300 did. Anyway, back after Traveller, but back in there, Star Trek role-playing game came out, and they had a lot of cool stuff on the Klingons, and the Klingons had a lot of and Axanar picked this up too, that the Klingons had initially just had contempt for humans, saw them as nothing but weak and an empire in decline, a dying empire. But in this role-playing game, they had a Klingon word for humanity's kind of empire. But the Romulans were a growing, thriving, aggressive empire that deserved respect, while the Federation was just a bunch of decadent, soft weaklings in decline. And Axanar, in that amazing, thing that they actually finished with Richard Hatch and stuff, there's some great moments in that when he as the Klingon commander realized we may have underestimated these humans, and vassal state, that's the word I was looking for. Thank you, Roadrunner. Vassal state. Yes, they wouldn't have done it. They would have gone out swinging. And if they wouldn't have gone out swinging, then they weren't Klingons. That's how they should have ended. If you're gonna kill the Klingon homeworld, don't incorporate Klingons into the Federation. Have the Klingon race go down in a blaze of glory, and if you need to have Klingons after that happens, then find a planet that has a Klingon outpost on it that has refused to surrender, in the same way that these Japanese soldiers would come down from the hills in Okinawa. There's been a Klingon colony here for 85 years that never got the not only they did get the message about the Klingon world being destroyed, but they're not gonna surrender. They're just gonna wait until they have a chance to go out like Klingons. That would have been honest. It would have been honest, and it wouldn't have been lazy. And that's what was interesting about the Undiscovered Country, was that a lot of the Klingons just said, no, we're going down swinging, man. Going down swinging. So there you go. All right, last one. Roadrunner. Greetings again, friend Bill. Hey, Roadrunner, how are you? Have some bad news for you. Radical feminist historian has discovered that William Shakespeare was actually a black Jewish female from North Africa. I've heard of this. Is there any conspiracy theory so outlandish that someone can't try to foist it on the world? Well, here's the problem. People who know things can see how ridiculous this is. Irene Coslet has come up with this theory. But if you have the means of messaging, you could get people to believe it, because the stupider you get, the more confident you are that you're right. That's the Dunning-Kruger effect in a nutshell. And as the ability to think critically and challenge your own beliefs and just generally think it all declines, then if people start saying that Shakespeare was a black Jewish woman, then entire generations after that will come to believe it. Coslet argues the topic of Shakespeare's true identity is best approached via critical theory and feminist theory perspective. Well, here's the thing about it, Miss Irene Coslet. You're just a 22-year-old nothing who is trying to convince yourself, your friends, and everybody else that you know more about the greatest writer that ever lived by a fair margin. And let's see what she says. A central component of my framework is the concept of the subaltern, developed by Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak. History, Spivak argued, is narrated by the hegemonic West, and in particular by white men as the subject. The subaltern is silenced. Black and female identities are suppressed and constructed as the other. Depicting female and black identities as the other, Spivak argued, justifies and perpetuates the domination of the white male subject. The erasure of identities in the radicalized and patriarchal narration of history reinforces prescribed roles and power relations in society. That is the literary equivalent of the turbo encabulator. It is jargon designed to obscure ideas rather than to make them clear, but I can tell you how I can prove that that William Shakespeare was a white male and not a black Jewish female from Africa. Because if this culture of black Jewish females in Africa had produced William Shakespeare, then African black Jews would have conquered white Christian males, and Europe would have been colonized by those people. And that didn't happen that way. So there you go. Just another person looking for attention who is on some level aware of the enormous differences between what Shakespeare generates and what essentially any other culture other than European culture generates. I mean, let's just go there. If you go to a museum of African art, you'll see like these wooden face masks. And we're told that this is equivalent of Michelangelo's statue of David, that there's no qualitative difference between the two, that both of them are equally valid as markers of artistic achievement. And my response to that would be, which one do you think a non-artist could more easily make? Which one do you think is easier to make? A wooden mask or a piece of marble that's half again bigger than you, that has the veins on the hands carved? Have you ever seen the marble that was carved during the Renaissance of women in veils, where you can almost see the translucency of the fabric that's draped over them? That's not my culture. I'm an American. I'm not saying I did that. I'm saying the Italians did that. But, I mean, at what point? This is what the left has done to reason. They have bashed Westerners over the head with this so much that people can no longer admit what is right in front of their eyes, and the transgender movement is precisely the same thing. If that wooden mask is equivalent to the statue of David, then if you believe that, then you can easily believe that men can become women and women can become men, because there is no longer any external reality to guide you, and there is no longer any ability to discern any difference of any kind. Shakespeare, and here's really, you really want to get into the proof. The proof of this. You don't have to look at Shakespeare. You could look at the culture that produced Shakespeare. And what's remarkable about Shakespeare is Shakespeare has been performed, his plays, I mean, obviously, have been set in virtually every period of time in history, including the future, has been performed in virtually every language available on the planet, and encompasses ideas that are so universal that even though if you translate it into Japanese or Russian, you may lose some of the music of the poetry, you will still get, if you watch Hamlet, you will still get the essence of Hamlet, which is moral cowardice. How many plays from this supposed civilization that this woman is talking about, have been translated into English, made into movies, and shown around the world, where people will line up and pay money to see a play from Eritrea or Thailand or Norway, for that matter. Although Norway was probably a poor choice there because Norway figures into Hamlet, but Hamlet wasn't written by a Norwegian. You can't fake that. The thing about Shakespeare is not just the beauty of his language, but his concepts are so universal that you can set King Lear in Zululand and it'll work. And you can set it in the Shogunate and it will work. And you can set it in Viking times and it'll work. And you can set it anywhere and it'll work because it is transcendental. It is so connected to universal virtues and vices that you can play it anywhere. And when you get down to the actual texture of the language in English, I don't know which blows my mind the most, honestly. I really don't. The universality of the humanity of it, or it's been performed in Klingon, by the way. There's no question it has been. And of course, in Undiscovered Country, the antagonist does nothing but quote Shakespeare, which I didn't think was nearly as effective as having Khan quoting Melville, but there you go. What was it? There was a. Oh, you should read it in the original Klingon. Yeah. Henry V in Klingon, has that been performed? I wouldn't be surprised. I would not be surprised. The Klingons would be large admirers of Henry V. Yeah, my favorite Shakespeare is Henry V's St. Crispin Day speech. I think it's just absolutely every writer ever has tried to capture that. They tried to capture it in the Independence Day speech, and the only person who's ever come close to it, has been another Englishman, and that's J.R.R. Tolkien. He's the only person that has ever scraped the side of that Henry V speech in terms of presenting something that was that moving. But my God. And by the way, there's only one recorded performance of Henry V's St. Crispin Day speech. There's only one. There's been hundreds of them, I'm sure. I've seen Olivier's, and it's just wet cardboard. Kenneth Branagh's this is his first movie, I think. Certainly my first exposure to him. Kenneth Branagh's Henry V St. Crispin Day speech is perfect. It's just perfect. The pauses, the humor, the humanity, the fun that he has with it. That's what it is. Because Olivier is standing on a horse cart, if I remember, and he's doing this, and he's doing that, and he's doing all of this, and and Branagh is doing it OP style, original pronunciation. Branagh he's crouching down, and he's right in the faces of his soldiers, and he's laughing, and he's joking with his guys, Man, he was fantastic. He's fantastic. He's a great Hamlet too. I love him. Kenneth Branagh has always been one of my favorite actors, and I like Ewan McGregor very much. I like oh my gosh, what's her name? Who was his wife for so many years? She was terrific. Emma Thompson. Yeah, Emma Thompson was just terrific. Emma Thompson and Anthony Hopkins in Remains of the Day. That's just as good as it's going to get for acting. Remains of the Day is an amazing film. And I'm still waiting to see Hamnet. I missed it in the theaters. I really wanted to see it in the theaters, only there for a week or something. But I think it's available pretty soon on streaming. And hey, he's 65 years old. Next year he'll be 66. The year after that he'll be 67. Yeah, so he's about 15 months younger than me, I think. I love him. I think he's fantastic. I was sorry to see him split up with Emma Thompson. They were great. Oh, he had an affair. He had an affair with Helena Bonham Carter. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding? Boy, you want to talk about a downgrade, man. Well, that's just... that's inconceivable to me, frankly. Oh, Kevin. Well, Kenneth, I mean, really. For Helena Bonham Carter, I'll never understand that as long as I live. All right, well, whatever. Anyway, inconceivable. So that'll do it. Okay, well, it's been great. I have not seen Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead. I will tell you one very last quick stage story. One of the highlights of my college career, not that there were that many. So I was a theater major at the University of Florida, and I was never really an actor, never wanted to be an actor, was never particularly good as an actor. And I was always a writer and director. And we had a directing class, and it was good. It was probably 20 people in there, maybe. And we all had the same assignment. We all had to direct a scene of our choice from Waiting for Godot. Waiting for Godot is an absurdist existential play about these two men that are waiting for Godot, and it's it's this whole kind of existentialist post World War II kind of French sort of cynicism. And anyway, so everybody in the class got to cast actors from the theater department who were friends of ours and do whatever we wanted with Waiting for Godot. And the room we had our directing class in used to be, I think, like a small chapel or something at the University of Florida. It had really high ceilings, and it had Gothic arches and windows that were pretty high up there. And so for my version of Waiting for Godot, I had the two characters sitting up on these windowsills. They both had ladders, and and they both had cushions, and at the bottom of the ladders, and I had taken those cushions and gotten a whole lot of chalk off a board on the eraser, and just put just a ton of chalk on those two cushions. And when the scene started, I had a little cassette player, and I played also Sprach Zarathustra from 2001. And as I sing, bum 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 ba-da, and on the first ba-da, this one guy gets up, and they're both wearing helmets, and he starts coming down the ladder like slowly, and then right on the crescendo of this thing, he makes a jump off the last of the ladder, lands on the cushion, and this big puff of smoke of dust comes up. So they were astronauts. It was Captain Buckadoe and Buzz. I forget what the character's name. And I set the whole thing on the moon, and they were astronauts who were stranded there, and they were waiting for Commander Buckadoe in the orbiting command module to come down and rescue them. And I was so proud of that. I thought that was so much fun. Got a huge laugh, and once people realized it, but nobody was expecting the dust cloud. No, that was it, because it's a long piece of music. It's 60 seconds, and as they're coming down the ladder, and everybody's like, "Oh my God," and then right on that dun dun dun, poof, and that stepping onto the cushion and seeing the dust come up from the moon. That was a keeper of a moment. Anyway, yeah, that was that. So, yeah, it's a tough life being a theater major. So, anyway, that'll do it. It's time for me to go home. Time for this one to go home. What's that from? From Elin Baden-Baden. For this one to come. Is that from Mr. Peabody? I don't remember. Okay, so anyway, this show's made possible by the members at BillWhittle.com, and we're very grateful for the support as always. We've been almost 4 hours. Yikes, it's a long and 3:21 recorded. That's pretty, geez, that's nuts. All right, well, thanks everybody for being here, and it's great seeing you. Thanks again to the members for making all this possible, and we will see you guys right here on Thursday for your very own Stratosphere Lounge. Come on.